We are flying almost. The flying Dutch.
Dear colleagues, the sitting is open because Minister Maio has arrived, and I see that even my wife has arrived, so sitting on the gallery. So all conditions are fulfilled to start this session. I remind members that in view of the high number of members physically participating in this part session and in the increase in the capacity of the chamber, wearing a mask is compulsory. Speakers are allowed to take off their mask when taking the floor. The first item of business is a communication from the Committee of Ministers to the Assembly, presented by Minister Luigi Di Maio, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Italian Presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. This will be followed by questions to Minister Di Maio. After his address, he will answer these questions. Mr. Minister, I would like to welcome you. We are very pleased to have you here with us today and to have the opportunity to continue the discussions we started in Rome in November at the very beginning of the Italian presidency of the Committee of Ministers. Mr. Minister, our Assembly discussed yesterday and will discuss again today the consequences of the war in Ukraine and the need of ensuring accountability for serious violations of international humanitarian law. I would like to stress the excellent cooperation and communication that took place between the Parliamentary Assembly and the Presidency of the Committee of Ministers, together with the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, during the crisis that we are facing. The trialogue format allowed us to consolidate our discussions, ensuring greater coordination and effectiveness of our work, which allowed us to speak with one voice when needed and to stand firm to our principles when the red lines set up by the Statute of the Council of Europe were crossed by the Russian Federation on the 24th of February of this year. As you know, Mr. Minister, this resulted in one of the most difficult, historical, unique and sad decisions of the Committee of Ministers under the leadership of the Italian presidency had to take in this organization with the expulsion of the Russian Federation. The Parliamentary Assembly welcomes the decision of the Committee of Ministers because the Council of Europe acted firmly in synergy and in coordination. Mr. Minister, in this second part session, we highly appreciate the active participation of the Italian presidency, as it greatly contributes to the Council of Europe's reflection on how to address the consequences of the Russian Federation's aggression its role in the future architecture of Europe, as well as to the challenges of post-war reconstruction. Yesterday, Mr. Minister, we had the honor of having His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Italy, Mr. Mattarella, addressing our Assembly. And you know, Mr. Minister, that it will not an easy game to beat his performance yesterday in this hemicycle. But we are very much looking forward to your intervention now in our hemicycle and to your answering the questions of our parliamentarians. Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Grazie, signor Presidente dell'Assemblea parlamentare, signora Segretaria Generale del Consiglio d'Europa, signore e signori membri del Parlamento. Ieri da questo podio il Presidente della Repubblica Italiana, Sergio Mattarella, ha rivolto a questo emiciclo un messaggio di consapevolezza dell'entità delle sfide che ci attendono, ma anche di grande fiducia nei confronti del Consiglio d'Europa a fronte delle sfide che ci attendono e di riconoscimento del ruolo essenziale svolto dall'Assemblea parlamentare. In questa cornice sono molto lieto di rivolgermi ancora una volta a questa Assemblea per riferire sui recenti sviluppi in seno al Comitato dei Ministri e per richiamare la vostra attenzione su alcune iniziative della Presidenza italiana in ambiti di attività che interessano anche l'Assemblea. In occasione del mio intervento alla Commissione permanente dell'Assemblea parlamentare del Consiglio d'Europa il 25 novembre scorso, la nostra organizzazione aveva 47 Stati membri. Oggi ne abbiamo 46. Per la prima volta nella storia dell'organizzazione uno Stato membro è stato escluso. L'estromissione della Federazione Russa dal Consiglio d'Europa è stata resa inevitabile dall'atrocità dei crimini commessi in Ucraina. Non solo la Russia ha invaso illegalmente, in maniera ingiustificata, un altro Stato membro, ma ha proseguito nella propria aggressione in aperta violazione dei diritti umani e del diritto internazionale umanitario. La decisione di escludere la Federazione Russa è stata presa unitamente a questa Assemblea. Il parere, adottato all'unanimità il 15 marzo 2022, in cui affermavate che la Federazione Russa non aveva più i requisiti per far parte del Consiglio d'Europa, è stato pienamente e tempestivamente recepito dal Comitato dei Ministri, che il giorno successivo lo ha fatto proprio, decidendo che la Federazione Russa dovesse essere esclusa dall'organizzazione. Il Comitato dei Ministri ha altresì deciso di sospendere tutte le relazioni con la Bielorussia a seguito dell'attiva partecipazione di questo Paese all'aggressione contro l'Ucraina. Si tratta di decisioni molto significative con conseguenze pratiche, giuridiche e finanziarie sia per i Paesi interessati che per la nostra organizzazione. Il Comitato dei Ministri ha rapidamente adottato le necessarie misure interpretative. Non essendo più parte del Consiglio d'Europa, la Federazione Russa ha tra l'altro perso il suo diritto di rappresentanza in Assemblea e in praticamente tutti gli organismi del Consiglio d'Europa. Ha inoltre cessato di essere parte di accordi parziali o allargati come la Commissione di Venezia, Eurimage, nonché di convenzioni aperte solo agli Stati membri come la Carta Sociale Europea o la Convenzione Europea sulla repressione del terrorismo. Per quanto riguarda la Convenzione Europea dei diritti dell'uomo, la Federazione Russa cesserà di essere parte della stessa a partire dal 16 settembre 2022. La Corte Europea dei diritti dell'uomo continuerà ad essere competente a trattare i ricorsi contro la Russia in merito a possibili violazioni della Convenzione avvenute antecedentemente a questa data. I delegati dei ministri, assistiti da rispettivi gruppi di relatori, sono al lavoro per dirimere alcune questioni tuttora pendenti relative all'appartenenza della Federazione Russa ad accordi o organi molto specifici. I delegati esamineranno anche le conseguenze finanziarie per il Consiglio d'Europa dell'espulsione della Federazione Russa al fine di mitigarne l'impatto. Benché le questioni relative all'aggressione contro l'Ucraina siano state al centro delle preoccupazioni del Comitato dei Ministri negli ultimi 2 mesi, il Comitato ha comunque proseguito il suo lavoro in molti altri ambiti. In materia di libertà di informazione e accesso a informazioni affidabili, indipendenti e accurate, il Comitato ha adottato una raccomandazione invitando i suoi 46 Stati membri a creare un ambiente favorevole affinché un giornalismo di qualità possa svolgere la sua imprescindibile funzione nella vita delle democrazie. La raccomandazione, adottata lo scorso 17 marzo, contiene linee guida volte a garantire finanziamenti per media di qualità, a creare fiducia nel giornalismo e promuovere l'alfabetizzazione mediatica. Lo stesso giorno il Comitato ha anche adottato una raccomandazione per promuovere l'insegnamento della storia dell'Olocausto e per preservare la conoscenza dei crimini commessi dai nazisti, integrando nella memoria, nell'istruzione e nelle politiche pubbliche. Sempre a marzo, il Comitato ha adottato nuove raccomandazioni relative alla lotta al terrorismo, alla tutela di testimoni e collaboratori di giustizia e nel campo della giustizia penale. Il 6 aprile ha adottato linee guida per affrontare le sfide poste alla legittimità dei processi elettorali dalle nuove tecniche digitali di comunicazione politica, come il microtargeting. Vi invito ad approfondire, se di vostro interesse, questi testi sul sito web del Comitato dei Ministri. In questi mesi la Presidenza italiana del Comitato dei Ministri ha inoltre promosso attività su alcuni dei temi prioritari del nostro programma: la lotta contro ogni forma di discriminazione, la tutela del patrimonio culturale, lo sviluppo dell'intelligenza artificiale, i diritti dell'infanzia, i diritti delle donne e le politiche giovanili. In materia di lotta alla discriminazione, il 17 marzo abbiamo ospitato a Roma la 5ª riunione del Comitato Direttivo del Consiglio d'Europa contro la discriminazione, per la diversità e l'inclusione e abbiamo organizzato un evento di alto livello sulla promozione dell'uguaglianza e la lotta contro ogni forma di discriminazione. L'evento, cui hanno partecipato personalità della politica italiana, rappresentanti del governo, funzionari del Consiglio d'Europa e attivisti per i diritti umani, ha evidenziato i risultati e le iniziative in corso in Italia nei settori dell'antidiscriminazione, della diversità e dell'inclusione, in particolare in relazione a inclusione di popolazioni rom e camminanti, integrazione interculturale di migranti e rifugiati, lotta a discriminazione e intolleranza per ragioni quali la religione o il credo, l'orientamento sessuale, l'identità di genere. A meno di un mese dalla conferenza, il Comitato dei Ministri ha adottato una nuova raccomandazione agli Stati membri sulle politiche multilivello e la governance per l'integrazione interculturale. In tema di tutela del patrimonio culturale, la conferenza dei Ministri della Cultura del Consiglio d'Europa, svoltasi a Strasburgo il 1° aprile e aperta dal Ministro della Cultura italiano Dario Franceschini con la segretaria generale Pecinovic Buric e i rappresentanti di alto livello degli organi statutari, ha approfondito il valore della creatività e del patrimonio culturale quali risorse strategiche per un'Europa diversificata e democratica. I ministri hanno invitato il Consiglio d'Europa a lavorare su linee guida in vista degli ultimi sviluppi tecnologici, in particolare per quanto attiene all'intelligenza artificiale, integrando gli standard esistenti del Consiglio nei settori della cultura, della creatività e della tutela del patrimonio culturale. È stato inoltre formulato l'invito all'adozione di una nuova raccomandazione sul ruolo della cultura come mezzo per affrontare le sfide globali, di uno strumento giuridico paneuropeo per codificare le regole delle coproduzioni di sceneggiati e serie televisive europee e di uno strumento finanziario pubblico a sostegno di questi progetti. Al centro delle riflessioni dei ministri è stata anche la situazione in Ucraina, ovviamente. Il ministro ucraino della cultura e della politica dell'informazione, Tkachenko, ha rivolto un discorso alla conferenza e ai partecipanti si sono impegnati a preparare un futuro piano d'azione per la conservazione del patrimonio ucraino mediante programmi di cooperazione culturale e sostenendo l'anno della cultura dall'Ucraina in Europa. Sul tema dell'intelligenza artificiale, il 4 aprile si è tenuto a Roma, alla presenza del vice segretario generale del Consiglio d'Europa Berge e del sottosegretario agli esteri Benedetto Della Vedova, un evento di alto livello in occasione della riunione inaugurale del Comitato per l'intelligenza artificiale. L'evento si è concentrato sull'uso dell'intelligenza artificiale rispetto ai temi dei diritti umani, dell'etica, dell'impresa e della tutela dell'infanzia e sull'esigenza di trovare soluzioni globali alle sfide poste da tali tecnologie. Ritengo che il Consiglio d'Europa, in particolare attraverso i lavori del CAI, abbia un ruolo fondamentale da svolgere nell'elaborazione di norme vincolanti per la progettazione e l'utilizzo di sistemi di intelligenza artificiale che favoriscano l'innovazione nel pieno rispetto di diritti umani, democrazia e Stato di diritto. Sul tema della promozione dei diritti dell'infanzia, altra priorità della Presidenza italiana, il Comitato dei Ministri ha adottato lo scorso febbraio la sua quarta strategia per il periodo 2022-2027, lanciata all'inizio di questo mese in una conferenza di alto livello a Roma. La cosiddetta strategia di Roma si sviluppa lungo 5 direttrici: violenza contro i bambini, giustizia a misura di bambino, non discriminazione, tecnologia e partecipazione dei bambini. Un sesto obiettivo strategico è quello della tutela dei diritti dei minori in situazioni di crisi e di emergenza. La conferenza, che ha visto la partecipazione della segretaria generale, della ministra italiana per le pari opportunità e la famiglia Elena Bonetti e del sottosegretario agli esteri Della Vedova, ha offerto strumenti e indirizzi a sostegno della nuova strategia. Prendendo le mosse da un messaggio della First Lady ucraina, la signora Olena Zelenska, la conferenza ha altresì fornito occasione per evocare la drammatica situazione dei bambini colpiti dall'aggressione della Federazione Russa all'Ucraina. La Presidenza italiana ha inoltre dedicato speciale attenzione ai diritti delle donne. Abbiamo organizzato a Roma il 12 aprile una conferenza di alto livello sull'equilibrio tra lavoro e vita privata come leva per l'emancipazione delle donne e la promozione della parità di genere. La conferenza ha promosso un ampio dibattito su misure efficaci per contemperare vita privata e professionale, prevenire le discriminazioni di genere e superare ostacoli di natura sociale e culturale. Sono fiducioso che le conclusioni della conferenza serviranno da solida base per i futuri lavori del Consiglio d'Europa in questo ambito cruciale. Riguardo alla promozione delle politiche giovanili, ho avuto il piacere di intervenire al forum sul presente e il futuro dell'educazione alla cittadinanza e ai diritti umani in Europa, tenutosi a Torino dall'11 al 13 aprile. Il forum, integrando appieno lo spirito della nostra Presidenza e dei valori del Consiglio d'Europa, si è prefisso di sostenere un'educazione alla cultura della democrazia e dei diritti e libertà fondamentali, con un approccio alla governance del futuro che coniughi l'impegno delle istituzioni con il patrimonio di conoscenza, entusiasmo e dedizione di cui è portatrice la società civile. Vorrei concludere ricordando che molti dei punti su cui ho riferito oggi, in particolare la risposta del Consiglio d'Europa all'aggressione russa contro l'Ucraina, saranno all'ordine del giorno della sessione ministeriale a Torino il mese prossimo. Nell'esercizio della Presidenza abbiamo cercato con grande impegno di offrire anche uno spazio politico affinché la voce dell'Ucraina potesse trovare la più ampia e compiuta espressione e confermeremo questo impegno alla riunione ministeriale di Torino. L'aggressione russa e l'assistenza all'Ucraina nel quadro del mandato dell'organizzazione rimarranno al centro dei lavori del Consiglio d'Europa anche nei prossimi mesi. È importante per questo motivo che il Comitato dei Ministri e l'Assemblea parlamentare, così come il Segretario Generale, continuino a lavorare insieme con lo stesso impegno per cui si è contraddistinta la nostra straordinaria collaborazione nel guidare l'organizzazione verso decisioni dolorose ma necessarie. Questa collaborazione è sempre più fondamentale per costruire un Consiglio d'Europa forte ed efficace. Investire nella pace e nella democrazia non è mai stato così importante come oggi. Siamo agli inizi di una riflessione strategica che riceverà un forte impulso politico da questa Assemblea e che troverà nella riunione dei ministri degli esteri del Consiglio d'Europa del 19 e 20 maggio a Torino una cornice di alto profilo per approfondire principi e orientamenti su cui articolare questo processo nei prossimi mesi. A Torino saremo chiamati anzitutto a riconfermare il nostro impegno a sostegno del ruolo centrale del Consiglio d'Europa e dei suoi principi, valori e strumenti, nel promuovere i diritti umani, la democrazia e lo Stato di diritto nel contesto dell'architettura istituzionale europea. Questo impegno si collega necessariamente con la questione dell'impatto sul bilancio dell'organizzazione del venir meno di uno dei suoi 5 maggiori contributori e dovrà auspicabilmente far emergere a Torino l'interesse di tutti gli Stati membri ad investire su un quadro di sostenibilità finanziaria a partire dall'esigenza di colmare il deficit per il 2022. Nella cornice della riunione ministeriale potremo anche prendere in esame la prospettiva di un quarto vertice dei capi di Stato e di Governo, valutandone insieme i possibili obiettivi alla luce delle rinnovate ambizioni dell'organizzazione. L'Italia continuerà a concorrere a questa azione oltre la sua presidenza. Voglio rivolgere i miei migliori auguri, a nome di tutto il governo italiano, alla futura presidenza irlandese del Comitato dei Ministri, a cui esprimiamo tutto il nostro sostegno. Voglio esprimere inoltre la mia profonda gratitudine a questa Assemblea, al suo Presidente, alla Segretaria Generale, per la nostra eccellente cooperazione, tanto più essenziale alla luce dei tragici eventi che stiamo vivendo. Grazie a tutti e buon lavoro.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for briefing this Assembly about all the efforts that have been undertaken in the past months by the Italian presidency of the Council of Europe. We thank you very much for your most active involvement in that, but also I would like to thank you that you have informed us that there is more to do for the Italian presidency, that you are preparing the ministerial conference in Torino in only a few weeks to take place. As you already discussed yesterday in private, you nor your ambassador could ever have imagined that this agenda would have, first and foremost, a full-fledged war in Europe on the agenda, but you have to deal with it, and I compliment the Italian presidency that you are dealing with it in a so professional and accurate way. And I wish you wisdom and strength, Mr. Minister, because these are really challenging times for us. As you know, we are parliamentarians, and that means that we always have questions. There are quite a lot of members who have indicated their wish to ask questions. We will first take the 5 representatives of the political groups. Please, could you answer them one by one? And then we take the remaining, and I will try to group them in groups of 3. I remind members, you have 1 minute to ask a question, not to deliver a speech. First, I call Mr. Stefan Schenner from Austria. He speaks on behalf of the group of Socialists, Greens and Democrats. Stefan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Minister Di Maio, I will continue in the word of thanks and congratulations. This Italian presidency was a great moment for all of us, but it was also a sad time that we have to make the exclusion of a country, of a member state, which showed such a criminal aggression against another member state. My question is, we remind that in the time when the Russian Federation made the boycott, we came in big financial turbulences. We talked about reducing monitoring, closing one youth center, and then. Is there at the moment in the Committee of Ministers a planning how we can get this budget, not this incoming budget crisis? And I want to remind that when the Russian Federation joined the Council of Europe, the member states reduced their fees in the past. But now it's maybe time to make it in another way.
Thank you, Stefan. Mr. Minister.
Grazie per questa domanda. È chiaro che noi abbiamo di fronte una sfida importante, che è quella di affermare i principi e i valori di questa istituzione anche di fronte al rischio di perdere un membro di questa istituzione, uno Stato membro. E con l'azione che abbiamo condiviso, prima avete condiviso come membri di questa Assemblea, poi insieme al Comitato dei Ministri, abbiamo dimostrato realmente quali sono i principi fondatori che ispirano questa istituzione a cui apparteniamo. E voglio dirlo chiaramente, rispetto al conflitto in Ucraina, molti degli stati rappresentati in questo importante emiciclo e quindi molte delle assemblee parlamentari sanno bene che stiamo facendo di tutto per scongiurare una guerra mondiale, ma il fatto che non siamo d'accordo ad intervenire con le armi non significa che non dobbiamo fare nulla. Stiamo utilizzando tutti gli strumenti pacifici per contribuire all'azione di isolamento della Russia, perché è l'unico modo che abbiamo in questo momento per far cambiare idea a Putin rispetto all'aggressione che sta perpetrando in Ucraina. L'azione che abbiamo portato avanti, per cui voglio ringraziare il Presidente Cox, la Segretaria Generale, è stata repentina rispetto all'espulsione e ha dimostrato come in questo momento, di fronte a un fatto storico così drammatico, al di là delle diversità, possiamo essere uniti. E, nonostante la decisione sia stata difficilissima e ha rappresentato per anche la nostra Presidenza una decisione che non abbiamo preso a cuor leggero, con facilità, è chiaro che siamo orgogliosi di aver difeso i principi e i valori fondativi di questa istituzione. E deve essere chiaro che questo non disimpegna l'istituzione dall'occuparsi dei diritti della società civile russa. La società civile russa ha bisogno di questa istituzione e dei principi fondativi di questa istituzione per difendersi dalle violazioni. Grazie.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Next question comes from Mr. Vladimir Vardanian from Armenia. He speaks on behalf of the European People's Party. Vladimir, you have the floor.
Honourable Mr. Minister, the European Court of Human Rights is the unique institution due to which we are privileged to live under the single human rights environment. But in recent years, we are facing the reluctance and failure of some member states to go in line with its rulings. Essential judgments are not executed. Interim measures and other rulings of the court are not implemented, even after we are communicated to the Committee of Ministers, and even then, infringement procedures are launched. One of the benchmark cases in this respect is the Osman Kavala case. ECHR ruling demanding his release, Committee of Ministers reaction, and contrary to them, life imprisonment sentence announced couples of days ago. Mr. Minister, I would like to ask what, under the Italian chairmanship, we are going to do to provide precise execution of ECHR judgments and interim measures communicated to the Committee of Ministers, and how you are going to react to the national jurisprudence strictly contradicting to the court's case law. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. Mr. Minister.
Grazie signor Presidente e grazie per la domanda posta all'onorevole interrogante. Sul caso Kavala il Comitato dei Ministri ha ritenuto che, non garantendo l'immediato rilascio del ricorrente, la Turchia si stia rifiutando di attenersi alla sentenza finale della Corte. E quindi come Comitato abbiamo intrapreso il passo eccezionale di avviare un procedimento di infrazione ai sensi dell'articolo 46,4 della Convenzione Europea dei Diritti dell'Uomo, adendo la Corte affinché decida se la Turchia sia venuta meno agli obblighi previsti dalla Convenzione, non avendo assicurato l'immediato rilascio di Osman Kavala. In questo contesto esprimiamo, come ha già fatto il Presidente Cox, una grave preoccupazione per la decisione di lunedì della Corte d'Assise di Istanbul di condannare Kavala alla pena dell'ergastolo aggravato, ed è chiaro che come Comitato dei Ministri, come Presidenza del Comitato dei Ministri, posso assicurarvi che seguiremo tutti gli ulteriori risvolti di questa vicenda. Grazie.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Next question comes from Mr. Dmitry Natta Luca from Ukraine, and he speaks on behalf of the European Conservatives groups. Dmitry, you have the floor.
Sì, buongiorno egregio signor Ministro, vorrei ringraziarla innanzitutto per la vostra posizione personale, la posizione del Governo d'Italia, una posizione ferma e coraggiosa nel difendere i valori di libertà, indipendenza e democrazia, per aver mostrato una vera leadership non solo a livello nazionale ma anche europeo. Ora, la domanda che vorrei porre a nome del gruppo è la seguente. A causa della guerra contro l'Ucraina, Il Paese avrà bisogno di miliardi di euro per ripristinare le sue infrastrutture e le sue abitazioni. Potremo quindi contare sul Consiglio dei Ministri per esentare l'Ucraina dal suo contributo di adesione al Consiglio d'Europa a partire da quest'anno fino al 2032? Grazie mille.
Mr. Minister.
Grazie Presidente. Voglio dividere due ambiti. Prima di ogni cosa l'Ucraina può contare sulla predisposizione positiva da parte dell'Italia rispetto a questa richiesta e al di là della Presidenza noi la sosterremo anche oltre la nostra Presidenza. Allo stesso tempo, come sapete, l'ho detto anche nel mio discorso di apertura, stiamo valutando una serie di questioni sulla sostenibilità finanziaria nel suo complesso rispetto al budget per il venir meno del contributo della Federazione Russa e sicuramente possiamo analizzare anche questa richiesta nell'ambito di questo lavoro che stiamo portando avanti, sia con la segretaria generale e in generale anche in coordinamento con la Presidenza dell'Assemblea per garantire al massimo la sostenibilità finanziaria e allo stesso tempo dare seguito ad una richiesta come quella che lei ha avanzato. Ripeto, in ogni caso da parte dell'Italia c'è la predisposizione positiva a questa richiesta. Grazie.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Prochaine question vient de M. Claude Kern de la France. Claude, vous avez la parole.
Monsieur le ministre, l'une des figures de la société civile indépendante russe, Vladimir Kara-Murza, déjà condamné pour insoumission aux forces de l'ordre, a été placé en détention provisoire sur le fondement d'une nouvelle disposition qui rend passible de 10 ans de prison la diffusion de fausses informations sur l'emploi des forces armées russes, condamné pour avoir dit la vérité sur l'agression de la Russie en Ukraine. Que comptez-vous faire au niveau du comité des ministres pour éviter à Vladimir Kara-Murza une condamnation manifestement contraire aux valeurs de la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme? Puisque nous avons débattu cette semaine du partenariat stratégique entre le Conseil de l'Europe et l'Union européenne, accepteriez-vous, au nom du comité des ministres, de demander le placement sous sanction européenne des juges qui contribuent à cette persécution politiquement motivée? Je pense à Diana Michenko, à Ilya Kozlov ou encore à Elena Lenskaya. Soyez assurés que nous interviendrons alors auprès de la présidence française du Conseil de l'Union européenne pour appuyer votre demande.
Merci Claude. Mr. Minister.
Grazie Presidente, grazie all'onorevole interrogante su questo tema. Voglio dire che prima di ogni cosa abbiamo visto che rispetto alla situazione della libertà di espressione in Russia, subito dopo l'attacco ingiustificato all'Ucraina, la situazione è andata anche peggiorando. Abbiamo assistito ad arresti di migliaia di persone con la sola colpa di aver partecipato a delle manifestazioni di protesta contro la guerra di Putin in Ucraina. E su questo credo che sia molto importante tenere la massima attenzione. Sul piano giuridico io posso dire che la risoluzione adottata dalla Corte europea per i diritti dell'uomo il 22 marzo 2022, secondo questa risoluzione la Corte di Strasburgo resta competente a trattare i ricorsi contro la Federazione Russa in relazione ad atti o omissioni idonei a costituire una violazione della Convenzione, purché avvenuta prima del 16 settembre 2022. La questione, pertanto, potrebbe essere oggetto di un'istanza alla Corte. Sul piano istituzionale ricordo che il Consiglio d'Europa non è precisamente competente a decidere su misure sanzionatorie, però colgo l'occasione per ribadire la posizione che ho più volte espressa, che l'Italia non pone alcun veto nei confronti delle proposte sanzionatorie della Commissione europea e sicuramente il coordinamento con la Presidenza francese di turno è massimo e noi continuiamo ad esercitarlo nell'obiettivo di aumentare il più possibile la pressione sulla Russia rispetto a questo attacco. Sul piano politico la domanda solleva la questione del rispetto dei diritti umani in una federazione russa che non è più parte del Consiglio d'Europa. Questa questione è oggetto di riflessione e fonte di preoccupazione per tutti noi e dobbiamo chiederci cosa possiamo fare per sostenere i difensori dei diritti umani in questo nuovo contesto. Penso che questo problema dovrà rimanere nella nostra agenda comune per il futuro, ma nell'immediato futuro la riunione di Torino deve iniziare ad affrontare questo argomento che lei ha posto, in stretto collegamento con tutte le altre istituzioni europee, a partire dalla Unione Europea.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Now the last question on behalf of the political groups comes from Madam Nina Kassimati from Greece. Nina, this time we do not have connection problems as you tried to participate online earlier this week, but now you are live here in the hemicycle. So please ask your question to the Minister.
Okay.
You have to use the silver microphones.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Honorable Minister Di Maio, given the sanctions against Russia's Federation aggression against Ukraine, a tragedy which is not yet unprecedented in Europe since the Second World War, which tools the Committee of Ministers, being par excellence the supervisory mechanism of the application of the statute of this organization, shall employ under the Italian presidency in order to deal effectively and in a consistent manner with any occupation fait accompli directed by one Council of Europe member state against another. Plainly, I'm referring to the Turkish invasion and occupation of Cyprus for 48 years now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Mr. Minister.
Sì, grazie. È chiaro ed evidente che, come ho detto all'inizio, la decisione che abbiamo preso sulla Federazione Russa chiarisce non solo la determinazione nel perseguire i nostri obiettivi e nel difendere i nostri principi come istituzione, come Consiglio d'Europa, in particolare io parlo come Presidenza del Comitato dei Ministri del Consiglio d'Europa, ma allo stesso tempo chiediamo il rispetto con anche la massima sanzione, che nel caso della Russia è stata l'espulsione. Ad ogni modo, io credo che questo formato inclusivo, un formato così ampio, che ci permette di essere foro non solo di promozione di iniziative, ma anche di dialogo tra gli Stati membri, debba essere utilizzato al massimo per riuscire a superare alcune crisi che nel caso del Mediterraneo hanno visto anche profonde tensioni, grandi divisioni. Se la guardiamo anche dal punto di vista dell'Unione Europea, sappiamo bene quanto la questione che lei ha posto rispetto a Cipro e rispetto alla situazione a Cipro. Io ho visitato la buffer zone, ho visitato ovviamente il mio omologo europeo e il lavoro che dobbiamo continuare a fare è promuovere anche col Consiglio d'Europa l'azione delle Nazioni Unite per arrivare ad una soluzione politica che garantisca i principi e i diritti rivendicati. Noi ci ritroviamo in un Consiglio d'Europa che, come dicevo, è un formato ampio che ci consente di promuovere il dialogo anche tra gli Stati membri. Continuiamo a farlo, ma posso dirle che potete sempre contare sull'Italia per arrivare ad una soluzione definitiva rispetto alla crisi cipriota e sappiamo che è una crisi più ampia che riguarda il Mediterraneo orientale, che riguarda l'utilizzo delle risorse energetiche del Mediterraneo, delle risorse naturali. Noi come Italia abbiamo proposto qualche anno fa un importante documento sui beni comuni del Mediterraneo, su come sfruttare e utilizzare al meglio le risorse senza entrare in conflitto. Ma è chiaro ed evidente che il principio della sovranità e dell'integrità di uno Stato deve essere sempre tutelato e quindi sono d'accordo con lei. Grazie.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. If you agree, we now take 3 questions together and then I give you the floor to answer. Prochaine question vient de Monsieur Bernard Fournier de la France. Bernard.
Oui, Monsieur le Ministre, dans le cadre de la présidence italienne du Comité des ministres, vous avez organisé un événement sur la Convention de Lanzarote, co-organisé avec la présidence française du Conseil de l'Union européenne. Cette semaine, nous avons débattu du renforcement du partenariat stratégique entre le Conseil de l'Europe et l'Union européenne et de la correcte articulation des actions des 2 organisations qui devra être repensée dans le nouveau contexte géostratégique que nous connaissons. Au quasi-terme de cette présidence du Comité des ministres, pouvez-vous indiquer comment les 2 présidences ont travaillé en vue de la mise au point, puis de la valorisation de l'événement sur la Convention de Lanzarote, et plus largement, nous faire part de votre vision du partenariat à renforcer entre le Conseil de l'Europe et l'Union européenne. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, Bernard. Prochaine question vient de M. Piero Fassino, votre compatriote, Monsieur le Ministre. Piero.
Grazie signor Ministro, grazie anche per il modo vigoroso, forte e autorevole con cui lei ha guidato la Presidenza italiana. Il quadro che ci ha fatto questa mattina ne è testimonianza. La mia domanda riguarda ovviamente ancora la vicenda ucraina, e cioè siamo in una seconda fase dell'offensiva militare da parte della Russia, che dopo aver ripiegato sul Donbass si pone l'obiettivo di conquistare il Donbass e la costa ucraina del Mar Nero. E siamo di fronte a una risposta molto forte da parte della coalizione dei paesi democratici sulla base delle decisioni prese a Ramstein. E tutto questo rappresenta però un grande rischio, cioè quello di un'escalation ulteriore della dinamica militare, con tutte le conseguenze drammatiche e imprevedibili che possono accadere. E al tempo stesso noi siamo di fronte a una dichiarazione di Putin nel colloquio con Guterres che dice: senza Donbass e senza Crimea non c'è trattativa, quindi proponendo una situazione di muro contro muro. Ecco, lei come vede la prospettiva di qui in avanti e che cosa può fare ancora il Comitato dei Ministri a guida italiana per cercare di lavorare per una tregua che consenta di fermare le armi e apra uno spazio per una soluzione negoziale, una soluzione politica?
Merci, Pierrot. La troisième question vient de Madame Laura Castel de l'Espagne, mais je ne vois... Ah, Laura is online. Aligne. Laura, you have the floor.
Thank you. Could you hear me? Yeah? Yes? Hello? Could you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yeah? Okay, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Chair and Mr. Di Maio. We are deeply concerned about the disprotection of citizenship before deep state structures, using spyware tools for surveilling illegally the defenders of self-determination rights. 2 days ago, the Secretary General said that when confirmed, Council of Europe has mechanisms for protecting civil society. Well, then, the Spanish government yesterday admitted in Parliament that they have spied on us. Spain is a supposed democracy, but the reality shows that Spain, as Turkey, with HDP colleagues and the Demirtas and Kavala cases, persecutes dissidents illegally because they cannot win legally at the polls. What will the Committee of Ministers do in order to protect civil society against these scandals of persecuting dissidents? What type of sanctions does the Committee of Ministers foresee for that cases and for the case of Kavala and non-compliance of judgments of the court? We should debate other coercive mechanisms. This
Thank
is
you.
an abuse, and clearly we cannot expel every member state. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I remind members that 1 minute is 1 minute. Some languages take a bit more time, but nevertheless. Mr. Minister, could you please answer the 3 questions?
Grazie signor Presidente. Vorrei cominciare dalla domanda sulla Convenzione di Lanzarote che è stata posta. Voglio ringraziare l'onorevole per aver richiamato l'evento per aver citato questa questione, l'evento che la Presidenza italiana del Comitato dei Ministri del Consiglio d'Europa e la Presidenza francese del Consiglio dell'Unione Europea hanno organizzato. Tale collaborazione è testimonianza forte e sentita dell'interesse delle 2 organizzazioni a cooperare in forma sempre più stretta. Il Consiglio d'Europa e l'Unione Europea hanno sviluppato un partenariato strategico costruito sugli ideali condivisi di pace e democrazia. Io credo che il Consiglio d'Europa sia lo spazio naturale di dialogo e confronto in cui promuovere una cultura della democrazia e dello Stato di diritto in Europa. L'Unione Europea è il partner principale del Consiglio d'Europa sul piano politico-finanziario nell'attuazione dello Stato di diritto. Nel rapporto che questa Assemblea ha adottato la scorsa settimana si richiama l'esigenza di un ulteriore rafforzamento della cooperazione tra Consiglio d'Europa e dell'Unione Europea, e questo è un auspicio che non possiamo che condividere in pieno. Il Comitato dei Ministri resta fortemente impegnato nel processo di adesione dell'Unione Europea alla Convenzione Europea dei diritti dell'uomo. È un'adesione che darà ulteriore impulso alle relazioni tra le nostre 2 organizzazioni, fornendo una prospettiva solida per definire il ruolo del Consiglio d'Europa nel quadro dell'approfondimento del partenariato strategico con l'Unione Europea. L'adesione dell'Unione Europea alla CEDU è un obiettivo politico di lunga data dell'Unione Europea, che l'Italia ha sempre condiviso, sostenuto. In seno all'Unione Europea ci adopereremo come Stato membro e fondatore affinché l'adesione avvenga in modo preparato, a seguito di un esame esaustivo di tutte le possibili conseguenze interne. Questo affinché la partecipazione dell'Unione alla CEDU consenta a pieno titolo di perfezionare quel quadro di tutele dei diritti fondamentali che è già garantito dall'Unione Europea, senza che rimangano dei coni d'ombra. Quindi siamo pienamente impegnati su questo. Rispetto ovviamente alla questione posta dal Presidente Fassino, vorrei dire chiaramente che sin dal primo giorno noi abbiamo sostenuto l'Ucraina sia come presidenza di turno del Comitato dei Ministri, e l'abbiamo dimostrato anche con la decisione sull'espulsione e sulla promozione della decisione di espulsione della Federazione Russa, ma anche sul piano bilaterale. Abbiamo portato avanti sia l'impegno di supporto finanziario, sia l'impegno di supporto umanitario, sia l'impegno di supporto militare. E sicuramente il vertice dei ministri della difesa di Ramstein di qualche giorno fa ha rappresentato un'ulteriore evoluzione nel coordinamento del sostegno all'esercito ucraino. Allo stesso tempo noi abbiamo sempre come obiettivo ben chiaro quello di voler raggiungere la pace attraverso una soluzione negoziata, una soluzione politica, una soluzione diplomatica che parta ovviamente dalle disponibilità dello Stato sovrano invaso, che è l'Ucraina, e del popolo ucraino. Ci sono sicuramente degli aspetti che dobbiamo tenere in considerazione. Prima di tutto noi abbiamo sostenuto e continueremo a sostenere come Italia gli sforzi di un Paese che sta provando a facilitare questo negoziato come la Turchia. Una facilitazione che ha visto già 2 incontri e che deve continuare come sforzo, perché non possiamo assolutamente arrenderci all'idea che questa guerra debba continuare all'infinito. Dall'altra parte, ognuno degli Stati qui rappresentati nei vari consessi internazionali ha portato avanti iniziative per aumentare la pressione sulla Federazione Russa attraverso l'esclusione dai formati. Io devo dire che il Consiglio d'Europa è stato uno dei primi al mondo, ma poi abbiamo avuto tanti altri casi. Il Comitato dei diritti umani delle Nazioni Unite è uno degli altri casi importanti e eclatanti. Terzo, le sanzioni economiche disposte dalle più grandi economie del mondo, che hanno rappresentato un impatto ulteriore sull'economia russa non da poco. Ovviamente, quando ci ritroviamo un Paese che fa parte del Consiglio di sicurezza delle Nazioni Unite ed è potenza nucleare direttamente coinvolto nel conflitto, non riusciamo a ragionare con gli schemi che abbiamo sempre applicato in passato rispetto ad alcuni conflitti. Oggi io quello che penso e che dobbiamo avere a cuore è lavorare per una soluzione diplomatica e politica, ma aspettando adesso dei segnali di volontà di pace da parte di Putin, perché non c'è nessuna sicurezza minima che fermando il supporto all'esercito ucraino Putin si fermi. E questo è un tema che dobbiamo tenere ben presente, altrimenti rischiamo di fare facile retorica rispetto al supporto all'Ucraina e all'esercito ucraino. Ma detto questo vorrei anche dire che siamo orgogliosi di tutte le organizzazioni delle Nazioni Unite non governative per i diritti umani che stiamo sostenendo, come sia Consiglio d'Europa con vari statement che abbiamo fatto, tutto lo sforzo umanitario sul terreno per aiutare i più fragili in Ucraina, e credo che dovremo continuare nel promuovere ogni sforzo per garantire la massima assistenza umanitaria. In conclusione, il nostro impegno per quanto riguarda la soluzione diplomatica passa per 3 livelli: cessate il fuoco locali, cessate il fuoco generale e accordo di pace. E essere tra i paesi che fanno parte di coloro che si sono proposti come garanti per un accordo sulla sicurezza e la pace in Ucraina ci permette anche di seguire lo stato dei negoziati. Come ha detto anche il Presidente della Repubblica italiano, dobbiamo essere molto cauti rispetto agli esiti, ma non dobbiamo demordere sull'idea che dobbiamo cominciare a garantire cessate il fuoco lì dove questa guerra, nelle aree dell'Ucraina dove questa guerra sta massacrando migliaia di persone, dove probabilmente solo alla fine di questa guerra, che speriamo arrivi il prima possibile, vedremo realmente che cosa ha fatto l'esercito russo alla popolazione ucraina. Grazie. E invece volevo rispondere anche ovviamente alla richiesta della parlamentare, la membro dell'Assemblea parlamentare Castel, sul tema degli spyware e in generale dei software di spionaggio. Noi concordiamo che l'applicazione di questi spyware al di fuori di un quadro di regole sollevi dubbi, preoccupazioni sul piano politico, etico e legale. La questione, a mio avviso, va ricondotta nel quadro del rispetto dei diritti umani, proprio come ha detto l'onorevole interrogante, dei presidi e tutele previsti a livello nazionale per assicurare il pieno rispetto dei diritti violati. Come sempre, però, dopo aver utilizzato tutti i livelli e le strade di ricorso interne ad uno Stato, i casi relativi possono essere portati all'attenzione della Corte europea per i diritti dell'uomo. Un punto su cui noi abbiamo dato il massimo impegno come Presidenza di turno del Comitato dei Ministri è stata la questione dell'intelligenza artificiale, dell'etica dell'intelligenza artificiale, dell'uso distorto dell'intelligenza artificiale. È un tema che non dobbiamo assolutamente sottovalutare. L'applicazione degli algoritmi riguarda anche gli spyware e dobbiamo essere molto attenti nell'analizzare questo genere di tecnologie e ricondurre ai nostri principi e valori questo genere di tecnologie, portando avanti tutte le azioni e le iniziative che potremo implementare insieme per evitare che queste tecnologie finiscano nelle mani sbagliate o vengano utilizzate per violare i diritti umani. Thank you very much, dear President.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. As I would really like to accommodate all members who want to ask a question, if you allow me now, we take the last 5 questions together. I ask colleagues to be brief. That means you do not need the whole minute to ask your question, and then the minister can conclude. First on the list is now Madam Arushak Yohakian from Armenia. Madam, you have the floor. 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your speech. My question is the following. When it comes to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, the Council of Europe supports the role of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairmanship in finding a comprehensive and lasting political solution. With Armenian prisoners of war still in illegal captivity in Baku, ongoing threats towards the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as actually state-sponsored anti-Armenian hatred, what the Council of Europe can do in addressing the humanitarian consequences of the 2020 war and to promote a peaceful resolution for the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Joachim. Next question comes from Madam Marina Berlingueri from Italy. Marina, one minute.
Presidente, grazie. Grazie signor Ministro. Intanto mi unisco anch'io ai ringraziamenti fatti dai colleghi per come lei ha guidato il semestre di presidenza in questo momento così difficile per tutti. Allora, l'empowerment femminile e in particolare il bilanciamento tra vita privata e lavoro ai fini del raggiungimento di una vera parità di genere è stata tra le priorità del semestre di presidenza italiana. È anche una priorità della strategia 1823 del Consiglio d'Europa. Le chiedo quindi come è stato affrontato questo tema e quali azioni sono state intraprese ai fini di un suo raggiungimento. Grazie.
Thank you very much, Marina. Next question comes from Mr. Arman Gvorjian from Armenia. Arman, 1 minute.
Mr. Minister, far too often in this assembly we hear claims by the members of Azerbaijani delegation that there is no Nagorno-Karabakh conflict anymore, that there is no negotiation process within the frameworks of the OSCE Minsk group. I thought such claims would be addressed mostly to their domestic audience, but not to the Council of Europe, where many know for a fact that the conflict has yet not been resolved in a sustainable way. The Karabakh issue cannot be closed only by denying its existence. I can assure you that Armenian people is driven by a sense of responsibility and desire to ensure stability and prosperity in the region, where all peoples will live and develop in freedom and dignity. So my question is, to what extent are the three main principles for the settlement of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh developed within the OSCE Minsk group relevant to the Committee of Ministers today? Thank you.
Thank you, Arman. Next question comes from Mr. Halil Issafli. Halil, you have the floor. 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear Minister, pushbacks, whereas the European Charter of Fundamental Rights and other treaties to which Greece is a party. Due to the pushbacks exercised by Greece in the agency, we witness a shift in the migration route towards Italy. This route is more dangerous and increases the migrant pressure on the target country, as what is happening on Italy now. What would be your assessment regarding this current situation? And one more, taking into consideration the recent achievements in Libya, thanks to Turkey's assistance, would you agree it will be better if European Union cooperate more with Turkey on Libya issue? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Halil. And the last question is online, and it comes from Mr. Anton Gomez Reino from Spain. Anton, 1 minute.
Thanks, Mr. President. Buongiorno, onorevole Di Maio, buongiorno Ministro. La terribile guerra che c'è nell'Ucraina, motivata dalla inaccettabile invasione del governo di Putin, deve concentrare tutti i nostri sforzi per fermare l'aggressione e soprattutto per costruire diplomazia e pace. Ma chi si ha una terribile guerra non può portarci a pensare solo in termini di guerra. Ci abbiamo tante sfide a livello democratico, a livello globale, e ci abbiamo anche un dibattito che siamo tanti che lavoriamo per articolare un ordine internazionale più egualitario, più democratico e più equilibrato, basato su un impegno nel multilateralismo democratico e soprattutto pensare che non possono avere grandi poteri che determinano il futuro di tutti, sino relazioni geopolitiche equilibrate. In questo sentito, come membro Ministro della Repubblica Italiana e soprattutto come membro parte di questo Consiglio Europa pensato per garantire la pace nell'Europa e nel mondo, come pensa che dobbiamo lavorare per evitare scenari come quello che hanno successo anni fa a Siria, come quello che hanno successo nel nord d'Africa o al Caucaso, e soprattutto per costruire altre forme di vicinanza con i nostri paesi vicini nell'Europa e anche con i nostri paesi fratelli dell'America Latina, come dobbiamo lavorare per costruire un altro scenario di pace globale.
Thank you very much. Mr. Minister, quite diverse questions to you and only a few minutes left. I wish you well to answer them.
Grazie Presidente. Sulle questioni poste rispetto al Caucaso meridionale, come sappiamo, a seguito dei cessate il fuoco concordati nel 2020 e nel 2021, ora tutte le parti devono adoperarsi per garantire la pace e la stabilità. Con l'adesione all'organizzazione nel 2001, Armenia e Azerbaigian si sono impegnati a trovare una soluzione pacifica al conflitto. Entrambi i paesi ovviamente si impegnano ad agire in conformità con quelli che sono i principi ispiratori di questa organizzazione. Gesti di umanità, come il rilascio di prigionieri ad esempio, e rispetto anche alla sorte delle persone scomparse, sono importanti per costruire una fiducia reciproca e mostrare volontà di pace. Come sapete, come è stato detto anche dagli interroganti, il Consiglio d'Europa non ha mandato per essere coinvolto nei negoziati di pace, ma nei limiti del proprio mandato appoggerà qualsiasi sforzo che aiuti una rapida evoluzione verso un accordo di pace. In occasione della sua recente visita a Baku, il segretario generale ha indicato che il Consiglio d'Europa prenderà iniziative su attività per coinvolgere i rappresentanti della società civile dell'Armenia e dell'Azerbaigian in nuove misure di rafforzamento della fiducia. Su questa iniziativa la segretaria generale ha il mio pieno appoggio. Dovremo inoltre garantire che tutte le parti rispettino i nostri valori comuni, le norme sui diritti umani anche ai sensi della Convenzione europea dei diritti dell'uomo, e a questo proposito esistono anche procedimenti, come sapete, pendenti dinanzi alla Corte europea per i diritti dell'uomo relativi alle vicende del conflitto. Lo scoppio del conflitto in Ucraina non porta a trascurare le problematiche sottese alla situazione di stabilità nel Caucaso. Anzi, la guerra scatenata dalla Russia sottolinea l'importanza dei concetti di sovranità e integrità territoriale. Abbiamo preso nota degli incontri al più alto livello tra i presidenti di Armenia e Azerbaigian che si sono tenuti il 6 aprile scorso a Bruxelles, pochi giorni dopo la mia visita in Armenia e in Azerbaigian, e auspichiamo che un trattato di pace possa essere negoziato tra Azerbaigian e Armenia nel prossimo futuro. L'Italia è membro del gruppo di Minsk dell'OSCE e al di là della sua presenza nel gruppo di Minsk è pronta ad offrire il suo contributo richiesto dalle parti nel quadro di questo processo. Invece, in risposta all'onorevole Berlinghieri, ha posto un tema fondamentale, quello del nostro impegno per i diritti delle donne, della loro tutela ad ogni forma di violenza, tra gli obiettivi che sono tra gli obiettivi prioritari della nostra presidenza del Comitato dei Ministri del Consiglio d'Europa. L'abbiamo fatto in particolare con la consapevolezza dell'impatto asimmetrico e sbilanciato che la pandemia ha avuto sui progressi di progressiva emancipazione delle donne nel mercato del lavoro e nella società. Durante la pandemia e subito dopo la pandemia gli effetti economici e sociali della pandemia sono stati sicuramente maggiori, con un effetto devastante sulle donne. Nella fase più acuta della chiusura e delle restrizioni, legate all'azione di contrasto alla pandemia, questa fase acuta si è accompagnata alla crescita di episodi di violenza domestica, violenza di genere, lo sappiamo benissimo. Questa emergenza ha reso ancora più urgente il nostro impegno nel promuovere i servizi di aiuto alle famiglie, la piena partecipazione delle donne nel mercato del lavoro, il pieno coinvolgimento delle donne nei processi decisionali generati dalla diminuzione della presenza femminile nel mercato del lavoro per effetto della crisi economica derivata dalla pandemia. L'emancipazione delle donne è direttamente legata alla prevenzione della violenza contro le donne, compresa la violenza economica. La Convenzione del Consiglio d'Europa sulla prevenzione e la lotta alla violenza contro le donne e la violenza domestica, nota anche come Convenzione di Istanbul, approvata nell'aprile 2011 dal Comitato dei Ministri, resta lo strumento più avanzato a livello multilaterale per combattere la violenza contro le donne e la violenza domestica, e a mio parere dobbiamo aumentare tutte le azioni di outreach che servono a far aderire quanti più paesi possibile a questa importantissima convenzione. Andando avanti, su un altro tema che è stato posto, che è quello migratorio e in particolare nel Mediterraneo, anche con un'attenzione rispetto alla collaborazione sulla Libia. Io credo prima di ogni cosa che le sfide che abbiamo di fronte sono sfide senza precedenti. Già prima della guerra in Ucraina abbiamo assistito a quelle che sono sfide migratorie che sono provocate da guerra, terrorismo, violazione dei diritti umani e dello Stato di diritto, degli standard democratici. Dobbiamo affrontare queste sfide con una responsabilità comune. Un esempio rilevante di come affrontarlo è il progetto di raccomandazione attualmente all'esame del Comitato dei Ministri sulla protezione dei diritti delle donne, delle ragazze migranti, rifugiate e richiedenti asilo. Alla luce delle competenze del Consiglio d'Europa vorrei esprimere profonda preoccupazione per ogni tipo di respingimento in generale e ricordare che i respingimenti ai confini degli Stati membri sono contrari agli obblighi giuridici internazionali, tra cui la Convenzione europea dei diritti dell'uomo. Vorrei richiamare anche l'attenzione sulla recente raccomandazione del Commissario per i diritti umani del Consiglio d'Europa ai governi e parlamentari degli Stati membri, nella quale viene evocato il diffuso verificarsi di respingimenti, relative violazioni di diritti umani alle frontiere terrestri e marittime, e la raccomandazione affronta delle aree chiave, tra cui l'importante ruolo dei parlamentari che possono svolgere nella prevenzione dei respingimenti un ruolo di garanti dei diritti umani e non è assolutamente una dinamica da sottovalutare. Sono d'accordissimo con la collaborazione sempre più ampia riguardo alla Libia, che è una delle porte del Mediterraneo da cui transitano migliaia e migliaia di migranti e per quanto riguarda il tema del multilateralismo e di come evitare crisi come quella a cui stiamo assistendo, ma anche quelle che abbiamo visto in Siria, nella stessa Libia e in altre parti del mondo, nel Caucaso meridionale, dobbiamo partire da un presupposto: la risposta a come utilizzare al meglio il multilateralismo è nello stesso multilateralismo. Il momento di impasse del Consiglio di sicurezza delle Nazioni Unite che stiamo vivendo in questo momento rispetto alla crisi ucraina, ma come sapete sta colpendo anche tante altre crisi, ci impone, e concludo signor Presidente, di avanzare sulla riforma del Consiglio di sicurezza, di cui l'Italia è sempre stata una nazione promotrice in seno alle organizzazioni delle Nazioni Unite. Il multilateralismo in questo momento va rafforzato e lì dove si sta indebolendo per effetto di questa crisi richiede necessariamente riforme che abbiamo nel cassetto da 20 anni e che in questo momento devono necessariamente subire un'accelerazione. Grazie.
Mr. Minister, may I thank you very much for answering all questions of our members, and may I also thank you for the fact that during this part session, the Italian presidency has been with us at the highest possible level. We really appreciate that, and that you in this way you show your respect for this assembly, which is one of the statutory organs of the Council of Europe. We are really looking forward to the next days and weeks to come. We are looking forward to the very important ministerial conference in Torino, and I wish you well and strength and a lot of wisdom. Thank you very much for being here with us, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, the next item of business this morning is a debate under urgent procedure on the Russian Federation aggression against Ukraine, ensuring accountability for the serious violations of the international humanitarian law, which you find in document 15510 that will be presented by Mr. Alexander Poitier on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. As I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, on Monday, the Russian aggression against Ukraine and its consequences are naturally the main focus of this session. Yesterday, we adopted the report of the Political Affairs Committee prepared by our colleague Frank Schwabe, in which we have not only reconfirmed our condemnation of the Russian wars of aggression against Ukraine, as well as our solidarity with Ukraine and its people, but also called to support the effective investigation and prosecution of the war crimes and other violations of the international humanitarian law, including those through setting up an ad hoc international criminal tribunal. The debate, which will start now, will further develop these ideas and propose concrete measures for their implementation. But, dear colleagues, before going into this debate, I wish to say that my thoughts, and I think also your thoughts, are also with all those people who are still facing at this very moment risks of death in the war-torn areas. And I wish to emphasize that our top priority is to do everything we can to end the sufferings of the people in Mariupol, Izium, and other towns and villages in eastern and southern Ukraine, which are at this very moment shelled by Russian forces. Therefore, I wish again strongly urge the Russian authorities to fully at least respect their obligations under the Geneva Conventions and to take all necessary steps to allow safe and speedy evacuation of civilians from these areas. And I also call on all the relevant international agencies, including the United Nations agencies and the Red Cross, to facilitate the opening and effective functioning of the humanitarian corridors there. Now I wish to open the debate. I expect it to conclude the list of speakers at about 12:50 p.m. and then we will take the reply and the votes. I now call Mr. Alexander Poitier, Rapporteur. Alexander, you have, as you know, 7 minutes to present the report, and then you will have a further 3 minutes to reply at the end of the debate. You have the floor, Alexander.
Thank you very much, Tini. Thank you very much, President, for this introduction and your words. We've been, as a presidential committee, to Ukraine, and we witnessed the big courage and the struggle of our Ukrainian friends. And that was very, very instructive. Dear colleagues, yesterday we had an excellent discussion on the report by the political committee on the consequences of the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine in general. Today we have before us a report by Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights on a closely related issue. My report focuses on the need to ensure accountability of the perpetrators of violation of international humanitarian law and other international crimes. These are some of the many legal and human rights aspects on the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which the legal committee will deal with in another report under the normal procedure in the due course in the future. The accountability issues covered by this urgent report are indeed urgent. The aggression rages on, and day after day, new allegation of war crimes appears. After the discovery of the horrific crimes that appear to have taken place in Bucha, confirmed by satellite, by the images and ample witness testimonies, President Putin demonstratively awarded collective honors to the 64th Motor Rifle Brigade, which operated in Bucha precisely in the time of the massacres and which was finger-pointed by witnesses. This sends a terrible, really terrible message to the survivors and the relatives of victims. And even more, dangerous message is to the Russian forces that still operating in Ukraine, namely, don't worry. Don't worry about the rules of law, of war. Go on acting like 64th Regiment. You will not be punished for any violation, even on the contrary. So, we must urgently today send a signal in the opposite sense. Violation of international humanitarian law and any other international crimes will be investigated and prosecuted by the international community. The perpetrators will eventually be held to account. War crimes and the other international crimes appear to continue in Mariupol and other Ukrainian cities, towns, villages, which are under the temporary control of Russian troops, and the message of refusal of impunity must therefore be sent right now. My report focuses on pointing out ways and means to ensure this accountability on individual perpetrators of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possible genocide. I still say possible genocide, despite the news we hear about alleged mass killings and deportations. Accountability of individual perpetrators of war crimes should be ensured by the International Criminal Court. Its prosecutor has been granted jurisdiction by Ukraine over the entire Ukrainian territory since 2014. In addition, national authorities should be encouraged to exercise their universal jurisdiction to prosecute international crimes. They should do this in close coordination and with the ICC prosecutor. It is important to avoid any double work or, worse, contradictions. This is best done in the form, in my opinion, in the form of joint investigation teams, such as the one already set up between Poland, Ukraine, and Lithuania. Such so-called GITs allow for direct cooperation between the police forces, prosecutors of different countries without having very difficult diplomatic channels. So, that is what we recommend. Unfortunately, the ICC will not be able to investigate and prosecute the crime of aggression. This crime has been recognized for a long time. But the ICC can only deal with it if it is seized by UN Security Council resolution. As we all know, this would be voted against by Russia. The solution proposed by many important political leaders and academics, and since Thursday also by the Committee of Legal Affairs and Human Rights of this organization, is to create a special ad hoc tribunal for the investigation of a possible crime of aggression by the political and military leadership of the Russian Federation. Such a tribunal could be set up notably by way of multilateral treaty between a group of like-minded countries, as many as possible, of course. In my view, which would be endorsed by a resolution of United Nations General Assembly. Let us not forget that the General Assembly has almost unanimously voted the condemned to the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. In addition, the European Union and not least the Council of Europe could provide their political and technical assistance for quickly setting up such a tribunal and its operation. I propose that the ad hoc tribunal should be headquartered in Strasbourg, which would facilitate the cooperation and ensure synergy with the European Court of Human Rights. Let us not forget that the court is already dealing with numerous interstate and indeed individual applications related to human rights validation during the Russian war of aggression. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to listen to your opinions, and I will answer to all opinions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rapporteur, and I compliment you with your presentation. And you will have the opportunity to answer at the end of the debate that is now going to start. First with the 5 speakers on behalf of the political groups, and then with a long list of speakers. Again, I call on your solidarity and your discipline to stay within the 3 minutes. The less time you use, the more chance you give to a colleague to participate in this important debate as well. First, I call in the debate Madam Yevgenia Kravchuk from Ukraine, and she speaks on behalf of the ALDE group. Yevgenia.
Thank you, dear colleagues. I'm really honored to open this debate. But first, before we go to these legal terms about the court, about perpetrators and how to get them, I would like to remind you why are we here talking about this. I want to tell you a story of Mykola Mikitchik from the village of Katyuzhanka, Kiev region. As well as millions of Ukrainians, he can't come here and tell his story, but I can do it. Here's a school principal, Mykola Mikitchik, and what he told. We had 40 new laptops and 50 computers in our schools. Russian soldiers stole everything. They made a toilet for themselves in the classrooms. The houses in which they lived were completely robbed. They organized a torture chamber in the school basement and held prisoners from various towns and villages of the Kiev region. They mutilated people and filmed it. More than 10 corpses were found in this school basement. I am convinced that all this should be told in the international court. That's what he said. And what international community can say to Mr. Mikitchik to let him find a peace in his heart, justice, rights, the persecution of perpetrators? And what do we need to ensure the justice? We need the system of international criminal responsibility strengthened by the action taken at the domestic level. I want to congratulate this assembly because we are the first international organization to put this recommendation to establish the ad hoc international criminal tribunal to investigate and prosecute the crime of aggression committed by the political and military leadership of the Russian Federation. We need a comprehensive accountability system for gross human rights breaches, including of those crimes under international criminal law. And the Council of Europe can mobilize its resources to do that. The Council of Europe member states, as well as the Council of Europe itself, should step up their efforts to ensure that such system operates and is efficient, allowing for real prosecution and punishment of those responsible for these crimes. Not only the troops and so-called soldiers of so-called Russian army, but also those in hierarchy of command. The massive use of uncontrolled violence in the occupied or temporarily occupied territories were clearly coordinated by the command in Moscow and in Kremlin, and supported by propaganda at state media. And these propagandists should be in the criminal tribunal court, but not at the Lake Como. Moreover, the issues of damages, compensations, reparations, other measures ensuring from the state's liability in international law should be discussed, and the Council of Europe should provide immediate support to Ukrainian authorities in establishing such mechanisms. We cannot let Mr. Mikitchik down. We cannot let Ukrainians down who are waiting for this justice and truth. Today, everyone should ask themselves, what have I done to help? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yevgenia. Next in the debate, I call Mr. George Katrougalos from Greece, and he speaks on behalf of the Unified European Left. George, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is very logical, after having unanimously condemned politically the Russian aggression to Ukraine, to discuss now the legal accountability, especially regarding war crimes and the crime of aggression. and we should all stand unanimous in that. We have objected in a part of the report that is related to the establishment of an ad hoc tribunal. I remind you that the political has outvoted a similar proposal, and this proposal has been subsequently voted at the plenary at the last extraordinary session after agreement of the political parties of which we were not part. We voted the resolution then, and we are going to vote again for the resolution now, because we believe that the strength of our voice is dependent on our unity. But I must express the reasons of our disagreement. All of us who believe in global justice and peace have invested heavily at the establishment of the International Criminal Court. Till then, we had only ad hoc special courts for Yugoslavia, for Rwanda, for Cambodia. And you understand that any ad hoc court brings a suspicion of objectivity over it. That's why most of our national constitutions do not allow for ad hoc courts. Now we have the ICC, and the fourth core crime of, under its jurisdiction is exactly the crime of aggression, as it has been discussed and agreed upon in 2010 in Kampala. It has been already activated in 2018. It is true that there are procedural problems in investigating a procedure. Not only a referral, the court has also jurisdiction for a crime of aggression of one signatory state against another. But neither Ukraine nor Russia are signatories. However, I believe that the establishment of this ad hoc court weakens the authority and the jurisdiction of the ICC. It sends a message that we are very ready to deviate from general rules and establish very specific rules just to satisfy political, even very much legitimate goals. And more importantly, to the non-Western countries that have no problem to recognize the Russian aggression, but they have doubts if we apply equal standards, is going to send, I believe, the wrong message. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Next in the debate, I call Madam Suna Eversdottir from Iceland, and she speaks on behalf of the group of the Socialists, Democrats and Greens. Suna?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to commend the rapporteur on his excellent and comprehensive report that was worked on and finished with very short notice. I would also like to say that this is a combined effort of the Legal Affairs Committee. We worked very hard on this report, and I think we could get a much better report after our collaboration. I would like to point out that it is a comprehensive report, but it needs further work by the Legal Affairs Committee, where we lay out the legal questions in the report. And I know that we are already underway with such a report. So I would just like to say that the work goes on from here on the specific legal issues raised by the report. Now, there are several very important things that I would like us to support in this report. First of all, it is quite important that all of our member states use their universal jurisdiction whenever they can to prosecute any acts of war crimes or crimes against humanity that they have the jurisdiction and capability to do. This is one way that we can fight impunity for these horrendous crimes that are happening in Ukraine. Another way is, of course, to support our International Criminal Court. And this is something that I urge all member states to do, and it's something that is very clearly stated in this report. And then thirdly, we have the idea of establishing an international ad hoc criminal tribunal focused on the crime of aggression. I understand the arguments made by Mr. Katergalis. At the same time, I would urge you to support this idea, because we do need to show that there should be no impunity for the head of state of Russia. And this is the one close way that I see, we can try to ensure that there is an arrest warrant given out for Vladimir Putin for his responsibility for war crimes. And I don't see how else we could accomplish that fact. But finally, I would also like to point out a very important aspect of the resolution, which states, and I quote, that the United Nations General Assembly should request an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the possible limits to the veto rights of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. I think if this were to be approved, and if we would have a favorable position, perhaps we wouldn't need this ad hoc tribunal. Perhaps we could go the normal way. So that we have, in this report, we offer several very strong suggestions on how we can fight against impunity, how we can bring those responsible for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, and even possible genocide to justice. And this, I think, is our first response to this very important legal questions. We will continue to work on it in the Legal Affairs Committee. The Socialist Group will, as ever, support that work to the fullest.
Thank you, Suna. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Uldis Budrikis from Latvia, and he speaks on behalf of the European People's Party.
Yes, dear President Alexander, thank you. Three brief points. First of all, thank you, Alexander, for your work, tough, with purpose. And it was already said in the speech, in your speech, and especially in your explanatory memorandum. Secondly, dear colleagues, I would want to show you something. This seems like an ordinary Ukrainian flag.
Sorry, sir. We have here the rule. We do not show symbols, however sympathetic. Okay.
Excuse me. I brought it from Kiev. I was there on the 24th of March, right, a month after the invasion. It seems without a scratch, it's intact, but thousands, millions of people are not. We see people killed, civilians killed, children shot, fleeing from hotspots. And there's Bucha, Irpin, Izum, Mariupol. The list goes on and on. We also see mass graves. And in the 21st century, we see deportations. This is not the first time Moscow has committed such things as possible genocide. It hasn't been held accountable before. There hasn't been a tribunal, a Nuremberg, for their crimes in Holodomor, for example. So this time, Putin, his comrades have to be held accountable. That's why we need this ad hoc tribunal. And if the United Nations have gone impotent, then we as politicians sitting in this room, we have an obligation to send a clear signal for the world that these crimes will not be forgotten. We have a homework to do, every single one of us. And there are two things which are making this regime stronger. The first one is the sense of non-liability. So we need to send more prosecutors to Ukraine. I know that, as to my knowledge, France is already doing so. We need to help with the laboratories. I know, to my knowledge, Latvia is doing so, and other countries. And we need to allocate more funding to the ICC. A lot of member countries are doing that, and I urge you to do that as well at your home country. And the second one is fear. They thrive on it. And that's why I'm saying, maybe that's a little cliche already, but we need to toughen the sanctions and double down on help on arming Ukraine. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, Uldis. Now, the last speaker on behalf of the political groups is Mr. Erkin Gadirli from Azerbaijan. He speaks on behalf of the European Conservative Group. Erkin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with congratulating the rapporteur for the draft report he has prepared. This draft is excellent. I call it excellent not only because of its content, not only because of the severe time limit within which it was prepared, but also because it elegantly challenges some of the well-established norms of public international law. And let us not be naive. Some of the suggestions in this draft are quite radical. And that is why I understand why some of our colleagues may have or even raised some concerns about it. Just to mention a few, those norms are about jurisdictional issues and issues of international immunity. But in order not to be puzzled and perhaps even troubled by this radicalism, we need to take into account the context, because there is no text without a context. And the context is that there are atrocities committed on the territory of Ukraine by a permanent member of the Security Council. Now, there are several jurisdictional options with regard to international crimes. There are national jurisdictions, ordinary national jurisdictions. There are national jurisdictions which recognize and apply universal jurisdiction, and there is international jurisdiction. Now, national jurisdiction, all of them, apply two principles, territoriality and nationality principles. According to the territoriality principle, states have jurisdiction over crimes committed on their territories. According to the nationality principles, state has jurisdiction over crimes committed by or against their citizens. So Ukraine, in this regard, does have a jurisdiction over crimes committed on its own territory and against its citizens. But is Ukraine capable of investigating those crimes? Perhaps not, because it doesn't control part of its territory and some of the perpetrators are not present on its territory. Unfortunately, Ukraine is not a member state of the Rome Statute, but Ukraine made a declaration that it recognizes the jurisdiction of ICC over crimes against humanity and war crimes. And ICC already started doing something with that regard. But that is not enough. That is why this report suggests creating an ad hoc tribunal. Yes, from the strictly legal point of view, this is a very radical suggestion because it raises concerns about the legitimacy. But again, let us take into account the context. This is a very extraordinary situation. And of course, Russia having a veto power in the Security Council, this veto power needs to be bypassed, and that is why this draft report suggests requesting an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. Once again, I support this report, and I call everyone in this audience to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gadirli. As we now will have the rest of the list of speakers, and there are 39, and I would like to accommodate as many as possible. Therefore, we have to be very strict on speaking time. Shorter is allowed, longer not. First in the debate now, I call Mr. Kimmo Kiljunen from Finland. Kimmo, you have 3 minutes.
Mr. President, first of all, I would like to say thanks very much, Alexander. This is an excellent report. Furthermore, I say you, Alexander, it's also an important report. It's a very important report indeed. What we witness in Ukraine today is serious violations of international law and against human rights. We all have been shocked. Absolutely, we all have been shocked. The Russian continued aggression and brutality, and in particularly attacks on civilians, including women and children. I personally was very much surprised, maybe even shocked, when Foreign Minister Lavrov stated after this Bucha tragedy that it's fake. This is a lie. If you have a responsible world leader, political leader, the minimum he should say, let's have a proper international investigation. That's a minimum, not to start to use accusations. As your report, Alexander, stresses, our response to violations and brutality must be in accordance with the international law and principles of rule of law. Sometimes here also we politicians use rhetoric and we maybe too easily use terms like war crimes, crime against humanity, or genocide. These are very, very specific accusations and crimes defined carefully in international humanitarian law. And I think so we should respect that one also very, very much so. We need to be precise and correct in the juridical procedures that need to be taken. All of the war crimes committed in the Ukrainian war now by military and political authorities must be investigated, and the responsible persons should be charged, prosecuted, and held responsible. I fully agree, Alexander, with your report conclusions saying there must be no impunity for the violations of international law and human rights. There must be full accountability. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Kimmo. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Joseph O'Reilly from Ireland. Joe, you have the floor.
President, and at the outset, could I congratulate my colleague, Mr. Pochi, on his report, on the speed of the report, the contents, and the work done on it, and his fine articulation of its main principles this morning. So, can I do that at the outset? Can I say that yesterday we had a very fine debate, as cited by yourself, President, in which we identified issues around sanctions, issues around support, issues around dealing with displaced persons. But today the focus shifts to war crimes, to creating a scenario where in the future the way we deal with war crimes today will be a disincentive for future war crimes. That's the essential logic of it, while it's correct, obviously, to prosecute them in themselves, but they have to provide a disincentive to other states in the future. It's clear that the evidence is there from Bucha, from Mariupol now, the satellite images, etc. That's cited in the report. There's a clear violation of international law, clear evidence, we'd say prima facie evidence of war crimes and of breaches of international law. Now, the first question, obviously, we should have a prosecution through the International Criminal Court. That's a given, a principle in the report, and there's no question about that. And that we should all support the International Court in every practical way, financially, evidentially, etc. Now, the question is, the main question and the main issue of disputation here this morning is around the International Tribunal. Well, what I would say about that is it would be good to arrive at a consensus within this body on that. And I would say that certainly the Council of Europe has to be central. The United Nations must be central to such a process. The International Court of Justice. It would need, and that's why the Legal Affairs Committee report will be relevant as well. While the principle of accountability, the principle of international supervision, the principle of international prosecution is a fine one. We have to be careful to proceed in a very structured way and in a very nuanced way and in a way that brings to bear all the international factors, including the EU and our own body in a very particular way. We have a particular relevance here. So I suppose in conclusion, my essential points is that we're all in support of the International Criminal Court. We support the principle of dealing with aggression in a judicial way, but it's to achieve a modus operandi there that will involve all international partners and will show due process, and I look forward to the Legal Affairs report on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Now I call in debate Mr. Alexei Goncharenko from Ukraine. Alexei, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to thank Rapporteur for great work done. And it's not just the words, because there are main things here in this report. First of all, awful crimes, war crimes, atrocities were committed by Russia, not just by Putin. It was not Putin himself who killed men and women and children. It was not Putin himself who raped women. These were concrete people, Russian military, paramilitary who did this, and they should be responsible and accountable for this. And that is the only way we can prevent such things in future, and we understand this. And this is in the report. That's very important. Secondly, international tribunal. International tribunal, we need it. And we need all of them to stand at this tribunal. But certainly, first of all, Putin himself. Because he is responsible for what had happened. And he should be there. That is also said in this report, and that is very important. Thirdly, that the headquarters of this tribunal should be in Strasbourg. I agree with this. But I want to ask you that the name of this tribunal should be Mariupol Tribunal. Like it was Nuremberg Tribunal, this one should be Mariupol Tribunal. Because this city is now the symbol of this awful war, the symbol of inhumanity. And when we are speaking here now, people there in Mariupol are dying today, in Azovstal. And I want to address from this very high tribune, all governments, all parliaments, all of you, do whatever you can, please, help us to save these souls. Thousands of people still waiting there, and they're dying on our eyes. It's so awful, I can't explain you, but I believe that you know and you understand it. If you don't believe my words, believe your eyes. Come to Ukraine, I invite all of you. We will show you everything. You will see people who suffered. You will speak with them. Come to us. But now I want to ask you to support Mariupol, to help us to save these people. And I want to ask you to stand up now and to say, and in a common hour demand to everybody to help Mariupol. Please stand up. I just want to ask you, for these thousands of people who are suffering, I ask you to stand up, to support these people. They are watching at us, the whole world watching. Mariupol is now the capital of free world. We need to show that the free world can be great again, can be strong enough to prevent things like this. Please support these people. We need it now. Please act now. Please act and support them today, and we will do our job and our responsibilities. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you very much, Mr. Goncharenko. Next in the debate, I call le prochain orateur est Monsieur Olivier Biecht de la France. Olivier, vous avez la parole. He's not there, so we continue with the next speaker, is Mr. Kamil Aydin, Turkey.
Thank you, Chair. Dear President and dear distinguished colleagues, I would like to congratulate the rapporteur, Mr. Poche, for his remarkable work on such a short notice. I am devastated, like you, by the terrifying atrocities that took place across Ukraine as a consequence of the Russian aggression. In the 2-month span, according to reports, thousands of civilians were killed and civilian infrastructures of Mariupol and other cities were completely destroyed. Unfortunately, Russian aggression persists in several cities and continues to cause civilian casualties. It seems that a ceasefire is no longer likely in the near future. Nevertheless, we should continue to work using all dialogue channels for a possible ceasefire that would pave the way for dialogue and diplomacy, of course. Dear colleagues, targeting innocent civilians can never be accepted. Identifying those who are responsible and bringing them to account by holding an independent investigation into the issue is our main expectations. As emphasized in the report, if possible, existing legal instruments need to be considered to prosecute all crimes against the civilian population and those who perpetrate them in brutality. Council of Europe, with its expertise on monitoring human rights violations, could support the investigations and prosecutions with its competent organs. At this stage, we stand with the people of Ukraine who suffer from the devastating impact of the war. While we do our best to hold those responsible for crimes against the civilians. We must keep in mind that we have to address the short-term humanitarian challenges as well. In this respect, humanitarian corridors are required to relocate those who are trapped in the cities under Russian bombing. Finally, I condemn Russian attacks on civilians. From the humanitarian perspective, all member states must cooperate to address the needs of victims of the aggression and must work together to bring those responsible to account. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And now we have, I hope online, Sir Tony Lloyd. Do we have him online? Yes. Yes, okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Let me congratulate once again our rapporteur for what is an excellent report of the work, of course, of the Legal Affairs Committee in making that, bringing that report before us today. This is important. To say that there are and must be rules of war sometimes seems an odd thing, but if ever we recognise why there must be rules of war, it is this conflict being waged by Russia in Ukraine. The victims are individual, those who've been tortured, those who've been raped, those who've been murdered, each one an individual whose suffering was individual. But these crimes are collective, yes, committed by individuals, but these crimes are collective. And like others, I endorse the rapporteur's demand that there can be no impunity for those responsible. Yes, of course, the acts of individual soldiers, the acts of individual Russians in these atrocities must be brought to justice. But in the end, because these crimes are so widespread, the pulverization of Mariupol, the widespread use of rape as a weapon of war, the widespread use of torture, the widespread use of murder. Yes, of course, these operate at the level of allegations before the criminal justice system, but so well understood that these did take place, the world must demand no impunity. Now, within that context, of course, that does mean that there needs to be a very real message from this assembly today, that those who are responsible are not just the individual soldiers, not just individual operatives carrying out these acts, but those who command them, and that means the military command of the Russian armed forces, but of course also those politicians, those civilian politicians who sent the military, the Russian military to war, and of course that is the most senior people in the Russian government, President Putin and those around him. They must know that there can be no acceptance of their role in these crimes, and therefore there can be no impunity. I understand some of the arguments around the need for a universal legal jurisdiction, but we don't have that. The ICC is not a universal jurisdiction at the moment. Within that context, I think we must examine the capacity for a special tribunal. These have taken place in the past. Nuremberg, nobody doubts it. Some may doubt the role of The Hague, some may doubt other ad hoc tribunals that have taken place over the years. But in the end, most of us do not. Most of us recognise that those who are brought to justice need to fear that there will be no impunity. Finally, Chair, can I just say this? We do need also to work with the authorities to make sure that the evidence is collated. Without evidence, then we let down those victims. This is an important debate, and let me once again congratulate our rapporteur.
Thank you very much indeed. And now we have another speaker from the Ukraine, Mr. Soboliev.
Thank you. War is war. But even war has its own laws. And the violation of these laws is the most horrible thing in the world. Because when it's a violation of other laws, it can be done by some street gangs. But now we see that the main gangster, the main terrorist is a state, Russian state. It's organized by Russian president, Russian government, Russian parliament, by all Russian authorities. And it's a responsibility of whole state. when we hear horrible things about 400 women that now announce about sexual violence against them, and it's only from the liberated territories, what will be when in the east or in the south we will hear 1 million of them about such horrible things? But I want to speak now about nuclear terrorism. Maybe you remember what was a month ago on Chernobyl nuclear power station, which was controlled by Russian occupants. And now we see a high level, a huge level of radiation at this area. We are watching how missiles flying over other nuclear power station in Nikolaev. But just now, in these minutes, in my native city Zaporizhia, nearby, the biggest nuclear power station in Europe, in Energodar, is switched off the electricity. And all responsibility for this, it's not a nuclear war. It's not a nuclear weapon that Putin directly used against Ukraine and against the whole world. But it's really a nuclear weapon. And we must understand this, that even one small thing can be a serious tragedy for the whole world if we will not stop this. And this report, it's a report not for future, it's a report for now. In order to all criminals in the governments, presidents, and parliaments must understand that it will be a responsibility for all these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have Madam Christofferson.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, firstly, thank you to the rapporteur for this very important report. Secondly, after finishing this urgent debate, I hope this Assembly will be able to send a strong and unanimous message to the Russian authorities. Undoubtedly, the day will come when they will be held accountable for the serious violations of international humanitarian law committed in Ukraine. 2 days ago, the Norwegian Prime Minister held a new statement in Parliament about the consequences of Putin's war of aggression in Ukraine, in which some of his main points were: Russia has so far not reached their goals, neither in capturing Kiev nor in deposing Ukraine's legally elected government. Instead, Russia has suffered heavy losses of both soldiers and war material. And now there are strong indications that Russia intends to take control over the Donbas region through a bloody struggle for territory with extensive use of heavier weapons and heavy artillery, unprecedented in Europe since 1945. The victims are millions of Ukrainian women, men and children, killed, terrorized, driven into exile. Already, we are horrified by reports of atrocities against defenseless people, rape and torture, siege of civilians stuck inside towns and villages without humanitarian corridors. Every day, new cases of alleged war crimes are reported. Last week, Dagbladet, a Norwegian newspaper, introduced us to 43-year-old Irina Venediktova, the Ukrainian general prosecutor, originally hired to fight corruption. Now, side by side with foreign forensics, she is documenting bodies being retrieved of mass graves. Her work is of utmost importance. Investigation and documentation of these war crimes is a prerequisite for prosecuting those responsible. It's not enough just pointing to Russia. States cannot be held accountable, only individuals, a soldier, a general, a president. An ad hoc tribunal could hold President Putin and his inner circle accountable. A major challenge, though, is how to finance it. The ICC can handle general lawsuits, but within limited capacity. Probably they will concentrate on the most serious cases. Probably the largest number of cases can be handled by universal jurisdiction and be prosecuted in other countries. To conclude, Let us, for the time being, keep all possibilities and different locations open. The most important now is to gather evidence and get the necessary financial guarantees to ensure that we have the means to hold Russia accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Mr. Zingeris with us? I cannot see him in his seat. No? Okay, then we go back to Ukraine and to Madam Komienko.
She had gone to bed hoping that was the worst of it. She was wrong. You will come with us to find other women. They ordered her before shoving a gun into Alex's back and telling him he would take him to the Russian headquarters in the small village near Borodyanka. The piece that I have just read to you appeared on the front page in the Daily Telegraph recently. This is the evidence of a Ukrainian girl who was raped and tortured by a Russian soldier, and then was forced by 3 of them with the gun at her head to enstrain other girls for a collective raping. The journalists have spent a week in Kiev area trying to get hold of at least one girl who agreed to give this evidence, as all the horrors are still alive in their memories and psychiatrists are still working with them. Or another story, which I cannot recall without tears. This is about a 9-year girl who writes to her mother in heaven, thanking the mother for the best happy 9 years in her life. A mother was shot dead in the care by Russian soldiers when all the family was trying to escape from invaded town. The girl saw everything by her eyes. This is just a small piece of thousands of horrors which are still happening in Ukraine. And the thriller is just unfolding. When Biden called Putin the killer, many in the world doubted the correctness of his words. Now, the Russian leader has turned into a monstrous war criminal who should be punished with all the severe justice. Dear colleagues, we call on you to support Ukraine in investigation of war crimes that started by our Prosecutor General Office, police, and Security Service of Ukraine. Please help and support us in order to bring perpetrators to justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we move to Monsieur Kern. Vous avez la parole, monsieur.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je veux remercier notre collègue Alexandre pour son excellent rapport qui nous permet d'approfondir le débat sur la manière dont notre organisation peut contribuer à faire rendre des comptes aux auteurs des violations du droit international humanitaire en Ukraine. L'article 8 bis du statut de la Cour pénale internationale définit l'agression comme l'emploi par un État de la force armée contre la souveraineté, l'intégrité territoriale ou l'indépendance politique d'un autre État. Pour notre Assemblée, les actes commis par la Fédération de Russie contre l'Ukraine constituent bien une agression et celle-ci s'accompagne de graves violations des droits de l'homme confirmées par la mission de surveillance des droits de l'homme en Ukraine du Haut-Commissariat des Nations Unies aux droits de l'homme. En effet, les populations civiles sont délibérément ciblées. Des immeubles d'habitation et des hôpitaux sont volontairement frappés. Le but de ces manœuvres est de contraindre les troupes ukrainiennes à la reddition en bombardant et en terrorisant les populations civiles. Les terribles actes commis contre ces populations pourraient constituer des crimes de guerre qui, en aucun cas, ne doivent rester impunis. Pour une organisation comme la nôtre, qui se fonde sur l'état de droit, il est important que la justice puisse sanctionner les auteurs des exactions commises contre les populations civiles. Malheureusement, l'Ukraine et la Russie ne sont pas parties au statut de la Cour pénale internationale et celle-ci ne peut donc pas juger de l'agression commise par la Russie. Toutefois, à la suite d'une délibération déclaration effectuée par l'Ukraine sur le fondement de l'article 12 du statut de la Cour pénale internationale, celle-ci est compétente pour les actes commis sur le territoire de l'Ukraine dans le cadre de la guerre en cours, notamment les crimes de guerre, les crimes contre l'humanité et le génocide. C'est pour cela que le procureur général de la Cour pénale internationale a procédé à l'ouverture d'une enquête, ce dont je me félicite. Par ailleurs, le Conseil des droits de l'homme des Nations unies a également adopté une résolution permettant la création d'une commission d'enquête internationale indépendante chargée de faire la lumière sur toutes les violations des droits de l'homme qui auraient été commises dans le contexte de l'agression de l'Ukraine par la Russie. Dans ce cadre, il m'apparaît essentiel que le Conseil de l'Europe contribue à la manifestation de la vérité et au recensement des violations du droit international humanitaire afin que les dirigeants et militaires russes concernés puissent rendre des comptes le moment venu. J'appelle donc le Comité des ministres et la secrétaire générale à mobiliser pleinement les services compétents du Conseil de l'Europe pour prêter assistance aux autorités ukrainiennes. J'appuie également le souhait exprimé hier au sein de notre Assemblée de voir la commissaire aux droits de l'homme se rendre rapidement en Ukraine. Mes chers collègues, il est de notre devoir de faire comprendre aux autorités russes qu'il n'y aura aucune impunité. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Monsieur. Now we move to Mr. Eker from Turkey.
Thank you. Dear President, dear colleagues, I would like to begin by thanking the rapporteur for his great work. Russian aggression towards Ukraine has been persisting for 2 months, and it has become an unprecedented hostility and a challenge for the security architecture of Europe since the Second World War. I fully support all efforts and initiatives that would force those responsible for the hostility against the civilian population of Ukraine to account. All perpetrators behind the tragic loss of civilian population and destruction of civilian infrastructure in many cities of Ukraine deserve a thorough and effective investigation and prosecution. While this report particularly refers to some possible alternatives to prosecute those responsible, I believe that Council of Europe and its bodies may also be helpful in this process, especially by collecting evidence and building cases against those responsible for the brutal attacks on civilians. The international community must take decisive action to ensure that these perpetrators do not enjoy impunity for perpetrating terrible violent acts against the civilian population. For this reason, as rightly emphasized in the report, all member states must support the task of investigation and prosecution for perpetrators by stating political support and allocating necessary financial and human resources. On a separate note, while seeking at bringing those responsible to the justice, we must also respond to the humanitarian crisis that requires immediate and concerted action. Many member states, including my country, have dutifully responded to the unfolding humanitarian needs of those fleeing Ukraine and provided adequate aid for them. However, while short-term response to the crisis is sufficient, this humanitarian crisis stemming from the large numbers of refugee flows requires a comprehensive and long-term solution. Finally, I hope that this Assembly and Council of Europe would help putting an end to this war and bringing those responsible to the justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eker. I now move to Lord Fuchs.
Mr. President, let's never forget, as Mr. Kern said, that we're talking about Russia invading a sovereign country in a fierce, cruel and heartless way. Now, some people yesterday, in yesterday's debate, were talking about finding a balance between the two sides. That's senseless, ridiculous.
Ukraine poses no threat at all to Russia. The Russian troops have undoubtedly committed major atrocities. You know, when I see the corpses of little children lying in the streets, it brings tears to my eyes. I don't just think, however, of the suffering of the parents and the grandparents of those little children, but I think of the loss of potential. They could have gone on to be great doctors, saving our lives, scientists with new discoveries, musicians or artists producing some new masterpieces, or even politicians representing their own country and coming here to Strasbourg. That is the potential that we are losing. Mr. President, there's no doubt in my mind that Putin, his generals, and his forces have carried out mass murder amounting to war crimes, perhaps even genocide. But I accept what others have said and what the rapporteur rightly has said, for them to be brought to justice needs to be proven beyond any doubt in legal terms. And that is why it is right to find the forum, and I hope there will be no dispute ultimately about the better forum, the best forum, whether it's the International Criminal Court or an ad hoc tribunal. I hope we can resolve that, but they should be brought to trial. And I'm pleased, Mr. President, that the British government has pledged funds to support it, bringing them to justice, and the support of the Metropolitan Police to help to find the evidence to prove these war crimes, so that they receive the punishment they deserve. The soldiers, all the forces, of course, and the generals, but above all, the one person who made the decision which is resulting in all this grief, this murder, this terrible situation that we find ourselves, and that is Vladimir Putin. He must be brought before that tribunal.
Thank you very much, Lord Fuchs. Now we move back to the Ukraine and to Madam Mazhentseva. She's not
Thank you,
here?
dear President. Yes, I'm here. And I'd like to start with a citation which says, "Men make war to get attention." We have indeed one sick man who decided that he can be the center of this world. Well, he is not. Putin did one great thing. On the 24th of February 2022, he has united Ukraine as never before. This glue is so strong that, as our national anthem says, we will fight until the last drop of our blood. And this is more or less the same line in the Polish anthem. And we are so thankful on behalf of the delegation for the work that has been done by the rapporteur, Mr. Alexander Pociej. We can't underestimate the fact that every Ukrainian family was affected by this. But also you, dear friends, because the circle and the scheme of this war goes in this manner. Some member states of this honorable organization are still paying for Russian gas and oil. The funds are going there. They are still buying and producing weapons. It comes to Ukraine in bloody bullets and tanks, killing Ukrainian civilians, women and children and men, disabled, blind, those who can't hear, those who can't respond. Then our people are fleeing to your member states and you receive them tremendously well. We are so thankful for that. But you have to spend your taxpayers' money for supporting Ukrainians. And then this circle comes into spendings again. Colleagues, we have set very clear goals in this institution, dealing with the climate change, and the whole conference of Europe was dedicated to that. We had recently a Future of Europe Day held also in Strasbourg, when there was a very great idea, which was never implemented from 1952, a joint European army. Ukrainian Polk Azov, battalion which is now fighting until the really last drop of blood, supporting 100,000 Ukrainians in the basements of Mariupol. Those other Ukrainian beautiful army which is fighting across the country, 30,000 of which are women. They all need your support. And when you are asking us, what else can we do? Please vote for this resolution. Please vote for the amendment which can take the Russian assets of those who are using and misusing taxpayers in Russia to fund this war and to make them responsible in these crimes. We still hope that the justice will prevail. We still hope that we will receive you in peaceful Kharkiv, peaceful Melitopol, peaceful Odessa, and peaceful Lviv. Meanwhile, you are very welcome, as many of you have already traveled across Ukraine. Thank you, dear President. This is a historic resolution to be voted on. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Paul Gavin.
Thank you, Chair. The first thing I want to say is just how important this report is, and this resolution will be, and I will be supporting it. I'll be supporting it because we absolutely have to insist on full and proper accountability for crimes against humanity and war crimes. And it's clear, I think, to all of us listening to our brothers and sisters from Ukraine this morning, the true scale of the horrors that are still taking place on account of the Russian invasion. So let's be very clear on that. I do very much welcome the paragraph that specifies support for the ICC, for the International Criminal Court. It's so important. And of course, that issue then leads to making sure it's properly resourced, making sure it's properly financed. And as a member of the opposition in Ireland, I want to acknowledge that the Irish government has actually pledged an additional £3 million. And I think there's an example that all countries should take. I do have a concern in relation to the special ad hoc tribunal that's proposed. Absolutely accept the genuineness of the proposal in terms of trying to ensure that we hold Putin and indeed the Russian soldiers accountable. But I have a concern in terms of I think we should really focus on making sure that all of us get behind the ICC. I'm conscious that there are countries that are not currently signed up to the ICC, and I would rather our focus was in making sure that that happens, because it's so important that any investigations are properly resourced, but also seem to be transparent, independent, and credible. And I use the word credible because, and I take no pleasure in saying this, but the major proponent in the media in relation to this ad hoc tribunal across the West is former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown. Now, that's more than unfortunate, given that former Prime Minister Gordon Brown was directly involved in the illegal war in Iraq that led to 1 million deaths. There's something that just doesn't tally there, and we should never be afraid to highlight that. So those are my concerns, and I do hope that the Legal Committee can help tease that out, because I do think that Lord Fawkes is right in terms of making sure that we get it right in terms of which platform we use. I think the position that we should support is one clearly behind the International Criminal Court. But as I say, I'll certainly be supporting this resolution. Before I finish, whenever I hear conversations or debates around war crimes, around accountability, I will never apologise for raising the name of Julian Assange, who has done more to highlight war crimes in the last 20 years and who is rotting in Belmarsh prison today. And if the British and American authorities get their way, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. So I send full solidarity to our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. I support the call for investigations by the International Criminal Court, and I also once again call for the release of Julian Assange.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take the next two speakers who are both online, and then I will come back to Mr. Zingeris, provided he promises to make his contribution very short. Now we go to Madame Bergeron from Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, merci, Monsieur le rapporteur. Le 3 mars dernier, au tout début, dis-je, de l'agression de la Russie contre l'Ukraine, le président de cette Assemblée, l'honorable Tiny Cox, a demandé que la Fédération de Russie respecte ses obligations en vertu du droit international humanitaire, notamment les conventions de Genève de 1949 et leurs protocoles additionnels. Dans sa déclaration, il a souligné le fait que ces conventions et leurs protocoles additionnels, et je cite, prévoient que la population civile et ceux qui ne participent plus au combat, tels que les prisonniers, les blessés et les malades, soient protégés. Il s'agit d'une obligation légale, a-t-il ajouté, qui ne connaît pas d'exception. Malheureusement, il existe maintenant de nombreuses preuves que cette obligation légale a non seulement été ignorée par la Russie, mais également délibérément violée. Pour s'en convaincre, examinons brièvement les conclusions du récent rapport publié par le Bureau des institutions démocratiques et des droits de l'homme de l'OSCE. Selon le rapport, si les forces russes avaient respecté leurs obligations de distinction, de proportionnalité et de précaution en matière de droit international humanitaire, beaucoup moins de civils auraient été blessés et tués. De même, poursuit le rapport, dis-je, beaucoup moins de maisons, d'hôpitaux, de biens culturels, d'écoles, de bâtiments résidentiels à plusieurs étages, de stations d'eau et de systèmes électriques auraient été endommagés ou détruits. Bref, les forces russes ont rendu la vie des populations civiles parfaitement infernale dans certaines parties de l'Ukraine, si bien que plus de 5 millions d'Ukrainiens ont dû fuir à l'étranger et qu'un nombre plus important encore a trouvé refuge ailleurs dans le pays, laissant tout derrière eux sans savoir ce que l'avenir leur réserve. Nous devons certes continuer à utiliser tous les outils à notre disposition pour que les auteurs de ces crimes soient tenus responsables de leurs actes méprisables. Cela dit, nous devons du même souffle remuer ciel et terre pour venir en aide aux populations déplacées, mais aussi à celles qui se trouvent toujours dans les zones de combat et dont les conditions de vie ont été littéralement rendues misérables. Je sais qu'aucun soutien ne remplacera jamais ce qui a été perdu. Cela ne doit pas nous amener à baisser les bras, mais au contraire à redoubler d'efforts pour apporter notre aide. En tant que fier Québécois, j'aimerais souligner le fait que le gouvernement du Québec a déployé une structure d'accueil afin de faciliter l'installation de réfugiés ukrainiens, et ce, quelle que soit la durée de leur séjour chez nous. Il importe maintenant de faire en sorte de faciliter leur arrivée au Québec et au Canada. Nous avons proposé au gouvernement du Canada la mise en œuvre de navettes humanitaires qui pourraient, à l'aller, transporter les importantes quantités d'effets de première nécessité recueillis grâce à la générosité des Canadiens et des Québécois, et au retour, ramener chez nous les nombreux réfugiés ukrainiens qui souhaitent s'éloigner le plus possible des zones de combat. Nos bras sont grands ouverts. Ne reste plus qu'à faire en sorte que les Ukrainiens qui n'attendent qu'à être accueillis puissent finalement l'être. Je vous remercie de votre attention. Slava Ukraini.
Merci, monsieur. Now I go online as well to Mr. Weichel.
Thank you, Mr. President. This Assembly is right in holding a debate at this present session already on consequences flowing from Russia's heinous and unlawful attack on Ukraine. This being said, we know full well that the conflict is still far from over. We may, in fact, at this stage, be far from the beginning of the end. We may, instead, more realistically, be at the end of the beginning, to quote Mr. Winston Churchill. The first consequence I wish to mention is the enormous suffering and tragic loss of life in Ukraine as people die in their thousands in the ruins of cities that have been reduced to rubble, or they die in fighting for Ukraine's independence and freedom. Or they were among the thousands of young, unaware Russian and often brainwashed conscripts now dead who reportedly had never been told where they were going and for what purpose. And so we ask ourselves in despair, how on earth can there exist a regime like the one in Russia in our modern times? A Russian leadership which commits such atrocities in cold blood and which seems determined to just go on, laying further waste on the whole country and its population, 5 million of whom are now refugees in foreign lands. Likewise, how can there be a regime in our day and age that in one fell swoop manages to utterly destroy a whole European peace order built up over decades of strenuous international diplomacy? Now, years of repair work lie ahead, as we all shall together someday and somehow set about to recreate a new European peace order and to overcome the suspicion, the tension, and the bloc confrontation that the Russian attack on Ukraine has brought about. Dear colleagues, there are many other grave consequences arising from this war that I will only refer to in passing for want of time. They include a looming world famine, especially in Africa, as the production and exports of cereals by two of the world's biggest suppliers, Ukraine and Russia, are coming to a near halt due to the war. And they include a threatening worldwide economic recession, as shortage of oil, gas, and electricity, also indirectly caused by the war, causes runaway inflation. In conclusion, Mr. President, we will never forget what the Russian perpetrators have done, and we will never forgive these despicable crimes. I support the report prepared by our rapporteur, and I thank you all for your attention. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. And now I will take Mr. Zingeris.
for your generosity, Mr. President. Not always is possible to manage the time. So I would like to say to everyone that this report is completing the first steps done by Mr. Schwabe. Alexander, it's one of the best your personal reports during years and years and years. Well, it's very sharp, it's very clear. So my country, Lithuania, just joined and officially from the government side in the creation of a joint investigation team and already supported by Ukraine and Poland with the support of Eurojust, with the purpose of coordinating their investigation and pooling their results through direct cooperation between competent authorities of the participant states. I'm so glad that we started. I'm so glad that the sharp evaluation of International Criminal Tribunal proposed by Alexander Potsy is absolutely crystal clear way to investigate the horrible crimes against humanity and genocidal attempts by Russian army against civilians. And now I would like to turn your attention to the fact that corridors, humanitarian corridors, are not opened not only for civilians, but looking to the international law to wounded soldiers. So wounded soldiers and civilians should be evacuated from the regions under Russia occupation, and every country who belongs to Red Cross can have possibility to encourage Red Cross to do that immediately, including wounded soldiers, talking about Mariupol and other places. So coming back, we have Russian Democrats, Mr. Chairman and colleagues, imprisoned for the reason that they are in favor of free and integral Ukraine. Karamurza was just arrested for the reason that is stated in the United States, that was in the prosecutor's statement in Moscow against him, that he raised the question of and doubt about a Russian army invaded Ukraine, and he was against the war, Russia war of Ukraine. So in this case, 1 o'clock, Mr. Karamurza was always part of our body. He spoke to all our committees, especially to Legal Affairs Committee, and we would like to invite you 1 o'clock in the front after the end of our meeting, generously to go and to make in the front of our homocycles our generous human gesture, telling to the world for free Karamurza. Thank you so much. Slava Ukraine, and all democratic world is not allowed to narrow the free space in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I go to Mr. Hadjukovic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, in my previous life before politics, I was a historian. And in history, they say that history is deemed to repeat itself if we don't learn from it. Unfortunately, we have learned nothing, as the recent events have shown. For dear colleagues, does not Mariupol look like Vukovar? Doesn't Bucha and Irpin look like Srebrenica? Doesn't Kramatorsk look like Sarajevo and shelling of Sarajevo market, if you remember those atrocities? Unfortunately, they do. And unfortunately, we haven't learned from history. This report should not concern only Ukraine now, but we should look at a broader picture, because unfortunately, the recent events have shown that in the 21st century, such atrocities, such aggression, such inhumane behavior is still possible on our continent. And therefore, we should look also at the broader picture. I sincerely hope that it will never happen again. But, unfortunately, history says different. Investigation and prosecution, the approach to those, should take an international dimension, at least in my opinion, in order to produce thorough, efficient investigation and indisputable evidence for future prosecution. I am not a lawyer by profession, as I stated, I'm a historian, so I will let lawyers and law experts to work out the jurisdictions and which courts should be conducting this investigation. But I am also a politician, and I think that we, from this place, should send a clear political statement. And the political statement should be that all accountable shall be prosecuted. They will not escape justice. From the bottom to the top, from the soldier who was shooting and killing innocents to those who have ordered it, or when they learned about those atrocities, have not prosecuted. And the second message I wish to go out from this hemicycle is that no perpetrator of heinous crime is safe, either in Ukraine or anywhere else in Europe. And I will finish in Ukrainian. Mir Ukraini, Svoboda Ukraini, Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. And now we go to Madam Engblom.
Thank you, Mr. President. To begin with, let me from the very bottom of my heart express mine and my country, Sweden's, unconditional and wholehearted support and admiration for the brave people of Ukraine in your hard struggle and relentless fight against the brutal Russian military aggression towards your country. During my 5 years of this assembly, newbie to some of you, perhaps I have experienced somewhat turbulent times, to put it mildly. First of all, the annexation of Crimea, the turbulence against the former president of this assembly, and now a full-fledged, horrendous war from our finally former member of the member state of Russia on another. And during this time, we've tried to put the Assembly's attention to the unfortunate inability of democratic tools such as humanitarian laws, resolutions, and even sanctions in trying to hindering regimes such as Putin's, because to them it was all talk. It meant nothing to them. With that said, of course, we must not lose the grip of them as being democratic countries, but harder measures has to be taken, and it is my opinion that the measures suggested in this report will. I would say that in my previous life, Mr. Hajdukovic, I was a military. And just a few points of the current situation. Now, the Russian invasion of Ukraine hasn't worked out as swift and efficiently as Putin has hoped for. They have lost a substantial amount of military material. And, but there are very few examples in world history that defeat, of which we're all hoping for and contributing to, will lead to Russian demilitarization. But we have a window of opportunity of weakness if we keep the fight. Second of all, we must take into account that a considerable part, even a majority of the Russian people, or the citizens, supports Putin and his government. They might be disinformed, ill-advised, but that is a fact. And the Russian people are known to be enduring hardship. So I fear, although we are hoping for a swift end to this war, that it will be lengthy, since the Russian people supports its regime and its little father. So let me end by thanking the rapporteur, Alexander Poche, for his excellent and important report and forceful suggestions to ensure accountability for the perpetrators. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we go back to Ukraine and to Madam Bilazir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, dear President, colleagues, rapporteur. Today, war is in our common house. Aggressor has come to our home during what we are building for decades, to kill and rape our children and women, to deprive us from what we value the most, dignity, freedom, and the right of life. Here in PACE, it was a constant line of policy of appeasement of the aggressor
that all of this year were invited to dialogue, but was preparing for war. Did PACE make its conclusions after the war aggression of Russia against Ukraine? Yes. It became the first international organization to exclude Russia, and now we are the first organization to initiate the establishment of an international tribunal to investigate Russian crimes against Ukraine. It didn't work on mistake, but rather late, as bombs are falling again in Europe. 1,500 bombs already. Those that killed our people, destroyed our houses and economy. Russia is destroying not only Ukraine infrastructure, Russia is destroying the world order formed after World War II. Now we have this very needed and important report on how to find justice after horrific atrocities took and are taking place. And this report is about how to deal with consequences, about what Europe can do to avoid impunity for violation of international law. After we met in the extraordinary session more than 1 month ago, the number of destroyed residential housing increased from 1,000 to 10,000. At least 400 cases of rape of Ukrainians by the occupiers are currently documented. Girls, boys, and women are raped and killed in front of the eyes of relatives. Thousands of people buried in the mass graves and yards of residential housing. Russia is ugly aggression. It's not a great nation anymore. It's a pack of murderers, rapists, destroyers, and looters. And I want to support the rapporteur on conclusions that Council of Europe should oblige its member states to support Ukraine, providing human and financial resources in ongoing investigation and proceedings. But punishment will be someday. I'm sure it will be. But today in Ukraine, at least 215 children were killed, mostly with limb amputation. And it's very important that each case of crime is investigated and the perpetrators brought to justice. This is the only way to restore respect for international humanitarian law. The Russia have to clearly understand that the war they have started in Ukraine puts their country outside the borders of civilized world, and there will be punishment for each of their horrific crimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And now we go online to Madam Chelik.
Dear President, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the rapporteur for this comprehensive report. We are all horrified by the shocking reports of violations of human rights in Ukraine, such as summary executions, abductions, torture, and sexual violence by Russian troops, which may constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. All of these atrocities traumatize the entire generations of Ukrainians by adding new levels of horror to this war. There must be no impunity for international crimes of this gravity, and perpetrators must be held to account. The Council of Europe and the Member States should support the ongoing investigations and proceedings before the ICC, ICJ, European Court of Human Rights, and the Independent Commission of Inquiry set up by the United Nations. The most important recommendation of the report is the establishment of a special tribunal for prosecuting crime of aggression which falls outside the jurisdiction of the ongoing ICC investigation. The principal criticism of this proposal is that it would represent an egregious example of selective justice, that international justice would be undermined if its application in Ukraine reinforces the selectivity of the system rather than fostering universal accountability, and that vital questions of legitimacy and fairness must be considered in relation to the creation of a special tribunal for one crime in a European country when robust global accountability measures for countless mass atrocities in countries such as Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Palestine, Libya, and Myanmar have stalled or receded from the attention of the international community. There is a lot of merit to these concerns, which must be addressed by the international institutions, including Council of Europe. Reform of the UN system and wider ratification of the ICC statute should be supported, and the revision of the Kampala amendments on the crime of aggression should be promoted to bring them in line with the jurisdictional regime applicable to other ICC crimes, so that in the future, ICC's jurisdiction in a similar case would cover all 4 ICC crimes. It goes goes without saying that victims in places such as Syria and Yemen are no less deserving of justice than those in Ukraine. Nevertheless, for at least the pursuit of justice within our reach and for ensuring the highest possible degree of accountability for Russia's aggression, I support the resolution and the recommendation, hoping that this is going to be a turning point for the Council in taking equivalent level of action in relation to grave violations of international humanitarian law elsewhere in the world. It would be a good start for the Council and the Assembly to break their silence and support the only other ongoing ICC investigation concerning a Council of Europe member state. ICC investigation against Israel for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in the occupied Palestinian territories. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we go to Mr. Savickas.
Thank you, Chair, dear colleagues. Families separated, people lost, children dead, parents missing, son shot, daughters raped. E40 highway shooting, abduction and torture of civilians in Kherson, torture chambers in Trostinets, mass torture in Makariv, killings of civilians in Chernihiv, Bucha. I'm sure you all have seen photos. You have read what Russian soldiers have done, but just try to imagine the pain that each and every one of these kids and parents and all citizens and people have suffered and continue to suffer. We have to do our best to ensure that such strategies would not be repeated elsewhere. To do so, we must ensure that Putin and all his cronies are held accountable. I have just recently returned from my visit in Ukraine. Families, houses, entire cities are fully wiped out from the surface of Earth by Russian army. And the growing reports by international bodies and non-governmental observers show us that there is a growing body of evidence, figuratively and literally, showing that Russian armed forces have committed serious violations of international humanitarian law. It is rightfully stated in this report that all relevant instruments are already in order to prosecute war crimes and crimes against humanity and possibly genocide. International Criminal Court has jurisdiction. In addition, criminal responsibility of individual perpetrators of international crimes, European Court of Rights, Human Rights, International Court of Justice must take action to hold the Russian Federation accountable for human rights violations committed. But it is not enough. Each of us has to do our part. At national level, we must use our universal jurisdiction and to investigate and prosecute international crimes. At international level, we must join investigation teams already set up by Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, with support of Eurojust. Even more importantly, we must set up ad hoc international criminal tribunal with a strong mandate to investigate and prosecute solemnly the crimes of aggression allegedly committed by political and military leadership of Russian Federation. But we must see that war crimes and human rights violations must be brought to justice and be accounted for. There is no peace without it, and there is no peace without Putin and Lukashenko paying a visit to the court. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. Prochaine oratrice dans notre débat est Madame Marie-Christine Dallos de la France. Marie-Christine, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le rapporteur, mes chers collègues. Depuis l'agression armée totalement injustifiée de la Fédération de Russie contre l'Ukraine le 24 février dernier, l'Europe se trouve confrontée à une situation dramatique qui fait ressurgir les souvenirs les plus sombres de notre histoire. Les accusations concernant des exactions de l'armée russe se multiplient. Doit-on parler de crimes de guerre, de crimes contre l'humanité ou de génocide? Il est encore trop tôt pour trancher et c'est la Cour pénale internationale qui le fera. Mais il est d'ores et déjà établi que des crimes odieux ont été et continuent d'être commis. Selon le ministère de l'Intérieur ukrainien, 720 civils ont été tués à Boutcha. Le bombardement du théâtre de Mariupol, à l'intérieur duquel s'étaient réfugiés plusieurs centaines de civils, a engendré la mort d'environ 300 personnes selon les autorités locales. De nombreuses autres exactions sont malheureusement à déplorer. Le ciblage de populations civiles par l'armée russe constitue des crimes de guerre. 3 types de juridictions sont aptes à enquêter: la Cour pénale internationale, la justice ukrainienne bien sûr, et celle des autres pays grâce à la notion de compétence universelle. La Cour pénale internationale a ouvert une enquête le 2 mars sur les crimes contre l'humanité et les crimes de guerre commis en Ukraine depuis novembre 2013. Sans reconnaître la compétence générale de cette juridiction, l'Ukraine en reconnaît tout de même les capacités d'investigation qu'il faudra absolument exploiter. La procureure générale ukrainienne indique avoir déjà enregistré plus de 7000 crimes de guerre russes. 3 pays européens, la Suède, l'Allemagne et l'Espagne, ont également ouvert une enquête. Enfin, l'Organisation des Nations Unies a ouvert une enquête sur les violations des droits de l'homme et du droit international humanitaire commis en Ukraine. La France propose de mettre à disposition de la CPI 2 magistrats et 10 gendarmes. L'Union européenne a également proposé son aide. L'Agence européenne pour la coopération judiciaire, Eurojust, a pour charge de coordonner l'ensemble de la collecte de toutes les preuves. Je pense que les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe devraient rassembler leurs efforts en matière d'enquête, car nous ne pouvons laisser impunies les exactions commises sur le sol ukrainien. Cela reviendrait à accepter tacitement la fin du droit international et la supériorité de la violence sur les valeurs démocratiques. Notre réaction doit être d'une fermeté égale à l'ampleur de la menace. Je voterai bien évidemment la résolution et la recommandation proposée par notre excellent rapporteur, M. Poche. Merci.
Merci à vous, chère Marie-Christine. Next in the debate is Mr. Dmitry Natta Luca from Ukraine. And you will be the last speaker in the debate. After you, I have to interrupt the list of speakers because we have to also have the replies. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, dear Mr. Chairman, and I would like to thank the rapporteur for a crucial and a critical work that he has done. Now, in 10 days' time from today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll all be probably wearing a poppy pin saying never again, as a symbol to remember the innocent victims of one of the most horrible wars in human history, and also as a symbol of inadmissibility of such wars in the future, of such bloodthirsty regimes and dictators that we have witnessed 80 years ago. Never again, we said, and we will say it again, but unfortunately it happened. Why it has happened again in Ukraine with Russia? Because Putin is a product of unpunished evil. And Putin had a perception that he was untouchable. And this is precisely what this report is trying to tackle, to punish this evil, to finally put him and bring him to liability, and finally to put him to the response for all those innocent lives that his regime has taken away. Now, it is clearly stated in paragraph 6 of this draft report that it cannot be presently covered by the ICC without a resolution by the United Nations Security Council, which the Russian Federation would probably block by using veto. Therefore, we need a tribunal. And I think this is common sense for everyone who understands what we're saying about. Nevertheless, we keep on hearing arguments yesterday, today, in this hemisphere, that the decision to put Putin and his regime to responsibility and to liability in front of a tribunal would weaken the authority of the ICC. Now, I would say, ladies and gentlemen, that such arguments, if they weaken the authority of something, is that the authority of a man who says such arguments. Anyone who proposes such an argument forward is the one whose authority is weakened, because it is obvious that by these arguments Such person is trying to protract the necessary decision to put Putin and his crooked gang to a response and to the liability. So let us not weaken the authority of this esteemed institution, ladies and gentlemen, by being soft and spineless when it comes to countering predators, terrorists, and killers, which are Putin and his crooked regime. Let us do what is right and say again, never again. Let's put this forward and let's adopt the tribunal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, but may I remind you, this is an agora where we exchange opinions. So every speaker is here allowed within our rules to express his or her opinions, because that in the end should give us the common wisdom how to decide. Thank you very much. I now, as I said, I have to interrupt the list of speakers, the speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present physically or remotely during the debate, but have not been able to speak, may be given to the table office for publication in the official report, provided that speakers connected remotely can report their actual presence when the debate is closed. I remind colleagues that typewritten text must be submitted electronically no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. Did you want to make a point of order, madam?
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. I would like to apologize and make a personal declaration concerning yesterday's vote on recommendation, where my voting was abstention, but it was an error. It's due to the lack of attention. Because this recommendation was adopted unanimously, it's very important for me to make this declaration that I would vote it, of course, in favor of this recommendation. Thank you, and I apologize.
Thank you very much, madam. And you know, this does not change the results of the votes, but we have heard what you said, and thank you very much for that, because we were indeed showing as much unanimity as possible, and it's duly noted. There is someone more who wants to? Yes, madam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have the same problems like my colleagues, and I so apologize for this, but I wanted to vote in favor in the Ukraine declaration or resolution. It's very important for me, for my country, and I'm so apologize for this, and I would like to change in the protocol to vote in favor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our Secretary General.
Thank you, President. Just to reassure the two members of the Assembly that they can make what they just said, they can make a statement on the verbatim record. So even if we cannot change the vote, you can go to the table office. They will explain how you can make this written statement on the verbatim record, so you can this can be publicly known. Thank you.
Thank you. And Madam, only those who never apologize should apologize. There's nothing wrong with admitting that something went wrong. And as the former speaker in the debate said, it was a lengthy debate. And in the end, we came to a conclusion. And now it's clear what your position is. Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Alexander Poitier, the rapporteur, to reply to the debate. Alexander, you know you have 3 minutes. You have the floor.
Merci beaucoup à toutes et tous qui se sont exprimés aujourd'hui. Après ce que M. Goncharenko et tous nos amis ukrainiens, ils ont dit aujourd'hui, devant une telle tragédie qui a touché leur pays, c'est très difficile de parler juridique. Mais nous devons le faire parce que ça peut nous permettre de punir toutes ces atrocités dont nous sommes les témoins. Je comprends les hésitations de mes collègues, M. Katrougalos, M. Gavin, M. Gadirli aussi, il a exprimé les hésitations, mais je crois que dans mon rapport, il y a quand même la réponse. Peut-être nous ne serons pas obligés de passer par le tribunal ad hoc. Nous avons la solution, et c'est écrit dans le point 11.5.2. Nous voulons demander à la Cour internationale de justice de rendre un avis consultatif sur les éventuelles restrictions qui pourraient être imposées au droit du veto. Et si jamais on peut aboutir, bien sûr, on le ferait. Et dans ce cas-là, on va passer par les tribunaux internationaux pénal, sans doute. Mais nous n'avons pas le droit, à mon avis, aujourd'hui, de nous priver de l'autre solution, c'est-à-dire de cette tribunal ad hoc. La situation est extraordinaire et dans ce cas-là, je crois que nous avons le droit de soumettre les propositions radicaux. Je voudrais souligner aussi que nous avons pris la décision et notre président de notre commission, qui est à côté de moi, Damien Cotier, il va poursuivre ce travail que nous achevons aujourd'hui pendant le rapport régulier. Et ce rapport n'est que le début d'un processus qui va assurer que les gens qui ont commis les crimes ne vont pas rester impunis. Merci infiniment, encore une fois, pour tous ceux qui ont pris la parole. C'était vraiment très instructif. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous. Do you want to make a point of order? No. Sorry, sir. Sorry. No. First. Sir. Yeah. Sir. Don't. So this is. Sorry, but we do not intervene in the debate in this way, but it's taken. But the debate has been closed, as I said, and you all have to stick to that. Thank you very much. Est-ce que le président du comité veut dire quelque chose, Damien?
Volontiers, Monsieur le Président. Vous venez de voir comment ça se passe parfois dans la commission juridique. Pour préciser les points, comme Monsieur Hadjoukovic, j'ai une formation d'historien et je crois que l'histoire jugera ce qui se passe actuellement en Ukraine et les responsabilités et qu'elle jugera de manière extrêmement sévère. Mais comme historien, j'ajoute, ça n'est pas suffisant que l'histoire juge et il faut que les hommes et que les tribunaux puissent juger. C'est la proposition du rapport qui vous est fait aujourd'hui. Le jugement de Nuremberg disait que le crime d'agression est le crime le plus grave parce qu'il contient en lui-même tous les autres. Et c'est évident. Le fait d'avoir déclenché cette guerre provoque aujourd'hui toutes les atrocités que l'on voit. Et à cette même tribune, il y a exactement 20 ans, Simone Veil nous rappelait que la Shoah est peut-être, disait-elle, le plus européen de tous les événements du XXe siècle parce qu'il a marqué tous nos pays. Et il a marqué la manière dont l'Europe s'est reconstruite. Et après cette tragédie, elle s'est reconstruite sur le droit qui protège les plus faibles. Le droit international et le droit de la guerre qui existait auparavant, mais qui a été renforcé aussi par les conventions de Genève, après, dans une nouvelle version, après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. Et ces conventions de Genève, je l'ai dit hier, sont universelles. Tous nos États les ont signées. Et elles donnent l'obligation de respecter, c'est un mot qui a été mentionné, le droit de la guerre, parce que la guerre ne se fait pas hors de tout cadre. Il y a des règles à respecter, elles doivent être respectées par tous les belligérants. et les conventions de Genève, dans leur article 1 commun, disent que les États doivent pas seulement respecter le droit international humanitaire, mais le faire respecter. Donc nous avons tous une obligation dans nos parlements nationaux et dans cette Assemblée. Et c'est vrai que le message, ça a été dit par le rapporteur et par d'autres, qui est donné par le président russe après des atrocités, de remettre des médailles et au fond de féliciter ces choses-là, c'est un message absolument atroce, catastrophique, et nous devons répondre. Et nous devons répondre par le droit. Et c'est ce que propose le rapport qui vous est présenté aujourd'hui, des réponses concrètes, beaucoup de propositions très concrètes que fait le rapporteur. Et la plus discutée, peut-être la plus importante, ce tribunal ad hoc. C'est vrai qu'il y a eu la discussion de savoir si ça allait affaiblir la Cour pénale internationale. Et l'avis de la Commission, c'est qu'au contraire, ça va renforcer la Cour pénale internationale, car nous savons tous que le Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies ne prendra pas une décision dans ce sens-là, et que par conséquent, il faut donc répondre, le cas échéant, par un autre moyen. Et aujourd'hui, notre Assemblée peut envoyer un signal clair et fort, et je vous demande d'être attentifs, chers collègues, au moment du vote, de ne pas vous abstenir si vous soutenez cette proposition, et je crois qu'elle mérite un soutien unanime. J'aimerais terminer en remerciant de manière appuyée le rapporteur pour ce travail, et aussi le secrétariat, qui a donné un appui extraordinaire en quelques jours. C'est un document dont vous avez tous souligné la qualité qui a été émise. Nous pouvons vraiment être très heureux d'avoir un appui de cette qualité. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Merci, M. Cotier. Le rapporteur veut ajouter...
Pardon, j'ai fait un horaire parfait. J'ai plongé dans le débat. Et je voulais encore une fois remercier Guillaume. Vraiment, c'était un travail fait très vite, un travail extraordinaire. Merci beaucoup pour votre aide. Merci.
Merci aussi à vous, Alexander. This was not a point of order, but it was an orally made remark. So thank you very much for that. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights has presented a draft resolution to which 2 amendments and 2 oral sub-amendments have been tabled, and a draft recommendation to which no amendments have been tabled. We will start with the consideration of the draft resolution, and then we will consider the draft recommendation. I understand that the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights wishes to propose to the Assembly that the Amendment 2 to the draft resolution, which was adopted unanimously by the Committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Cotier?
Yes, Mr. President, I can confirm.
Does anybody object? Not the case. As there is no objection, I declare that Amendment 2 to the draft recommendation has been agreed. Now we come to an amendment with an oral sub-amendment. I'm looking very carefully, Emmanuelis, if I'm doing everything right. I call on Mr. Zingris to support amendment number 1.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That was the idea, largely supported by Rapporteur Alexander Potsy, to include ideological war element from war ideology of Russian mir of Russian world, like mentioning the tool behind the war. That means to evaluate the racist ideology of Russia mir, Russia world. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Emmanuelis. I have been informed that Mr. Cotier, on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, wishes to propose 2 oral sub-amendments. We will deal first with oral sub-amendment 1 to amendment 1, which reads as follows. Replace after paragraph 9 with after paragraph 4. In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, if 10 or more members object it to be debated, I do not see any objection. Therefore, I now ask Mr. Cotier to support oral sub-amendment number 1. Damien?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'est simplement une question d'économie du texte. Le début de la résolution est plus descriptive. Ensuite, ce sont des appels et des invitations. Et il nous semblait que la place était meilleure après l'alinéa 4 actuelle.
Merci, Damien. Does anybody wish to speak against the oral amendment? Do not see any. What is the opinion of the mover of the main amendment, Mr. Zingers? You are...
Absolutely in favor.
In favor. Jack, did you want to? No. No. Okay, in favor. Did you want to speak against it?
No, I'm in favor of amendment and in favor to put, just Mr. Kotia said, to the place what you mentioned.
Thank you very much. I hope that I did not make too many mistakes, but I understand there is some miscommunication. Nevertheless, there is no opposition against the amendment of the movers. Then the committee is obviously in favor, and I now shall put the oral sub-amendment number 1 to the vote. The vote is open in the hemicycle and remotely. The vote is closed. Can I call for the results to be displayed? The oral sub-amendment is adopted. We now turn to oral sub-amendment number 2 to the amendment number 1 from Mr. Cotier on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, which reads as follows: replace the words seeks to draw attention with the words draws attention. In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, if 10 or more members object the oral amendment to be debated, that is not the case. Then I ask Mr. Cotier to support oral sub-amendment number 2. You have the floor.
Mr. President, I think it's self-explanatory.
Thank you very much. That's always great if things are self-explanatory. Does anybody wish to speak against the oral sub-amendment? What is the opinion, and I will look of the mover? The mover is in favor.
I'm absolutely in favor, sir. Thank you very much.
The committee is also obviously in favor, and I will put oral sub-amendment 2 to the vote. The vote is open in the hemicycle and remotely. The vote is closed. Can we see the results? The oral sub-amendment is carried unanimously. We will now consider the main amendment as amended. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment as amended? That is not the case. The committee is obviously... Damian?
The committee is in favor.
The committee is in favor. So I now shall put amendment number 1 as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. May we see the results displayed? The amendment is adopted. We will now vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15510 as amended, and a simple majority is required. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting is now open. The vote is closed. Can I have the results to be displayed? The draft resolution is adopted unanimously. We will now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation contained in document 15501. A two-thirds majority is required. The vote is open in the hemicycle and remotely. The vote is closed. Can we see the results to be displayed? The draft recommendation as well is adopted unanimously. Congratulations, Mr. Rapporteur. Before closing, I remind the leaders of the political groups that we now have a presidential committee in my office. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. with the agenda which was approved on Monday. The sitting is adjourned.